across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, 3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Welcome to the home of common sense. Well, sort of. You get the picture. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Heck of a lot going on this afternoon. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has vowed to abolish NHS England, the England bit, condemning it as the world's largest quango, declaring war on what he calls the flabby, unfocused and overcautious state. Did you sit up and think, oh, nice one, Keir, when you heard all of that? No, me neither. Well, how do we make Britain great again? Can we just cut to the choice? We just want someone to make Britain great again. Thoughts on that? Also, Donald Trump threatening to inflict devastating financial consequences on Russia, with the Kremlin rejecting a ceasefire with Ukraine, arguing that it would let Kyiv rest and rearm. Curious position from Moscow. We'll have more on that as well. And a new poll reveals that 86% of Brits, including 70% of Reform UK voters, cannot identify Rupert Lowe as the party faces turmoil, with the suspended MP still at war with the leader, Nigel Farage. Frankly, if you're a Reform voter and couldn't identify Rupert Lowe, you shouldn't be voting. Details on the way. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. Serious question. How do we make Britain great again? How do we achieve this? I'm not suggesting it's a straightforward road with no hurdles. I'm listening earlier to Keir Starmer wanging on about saving money, cutting down on waste. I mean, this was hardly Elon Musk territory, more Dodge than Doge, I sense. I watched this speech like an anxious puppy, hoping his master would deliver some meaningful goods, waiting, panting for my leader to make a big announcement that might at least give me a partial wag of the tail. I was looking for energy. I was looking for enthusiasm, some positivity, a sense of sunny uplands in a land of positivity. I wanted him to tell me how he was going to make Britain great again. That's what I want. Is that too much to ask in troubled times? I mean, look at where we are at the moment. Cost of living, cost of eating. Talking about this, a cost of eating crisis. I mean, despite some amazing technology in honing mass production down to a fine art, the cost of food has never been more expensive. We can grow. This is interesting. We can grow and pick 10 million tonnes of veg in weeks. It used to take us years to do this, but for some strange reason, it's quadrupled in price. Think of energy bills. I got that email yesterday as well, saying it was going up by another 500 quid a year or whatever it is. Thousands to heat our homes despite living in the most technological advanced era in human history. Trains don't work. Old steam trains from 100 years ago were more reliable than the most advanced trains on the planet today. We are going backwards. The cost of a simple holiday out of reach for millions. The cost of a pint off the scale. Millions not working due to sickness. Crime also out of control. You can't use a mobile phone in public without somebody nicking it, which, by the way, might be a good idea because you can't get a flipping signal anyway. Yes, 21st century, and we're trying to get a phone signal. Graham Bell would be spinning in his phone box-shaped grave at this. More seriously, kids killing kids, 12-year-olds hacking people to death in broad daylight. Yesterday, a 13-year-old arrested for murder. Bins not collected, mass rat infestations in many parts of the country. We're one step away from bubonic plague Mark II. Education still suffering after lockdown, a 2-year wait for a simple procedure in hospital. We're going backwards. And even if you are taken to hospital due to an emergency, you could find yourself languishing on some old trolley in a corridor. And that's assuming, by the way, you even got an ambulance to pick you up in the first place. People waiting 20 hours for an ambulance and sometimes not showing up at all. We are going backwards. And in addition to all of that, there's a debate involving some of our biggest institutions about how you describe what a woman is. Yes, we really are there. A person with breasts, apparently. That's how sick and messed up this country is. We are in reverse gear. Some of this, by the way, some of this could be a little understandable if our country was run by half a dozen people with a shared laptop, still running Windows 95, from a tin hut in Weymouth. But it isn't. It's run by hundreds of thousands of people on impressive salaries and pension plans working in enormous tech-filled buildings spanning acres. The size of the civil service has increased by 130,000 since Brexit. That's just a matter of years. There are countries around the world with smaller populations than the amount of civil servants we have here. And now the government are going to get the civil service to run the NHS. Man, you can't make this stuff up. How do we make Britain great again? And by the way, I could have read that list out with a thousand more things, facets, elements of living right now in the UK in the 21st century. Is it too much to ask? Though I want to see a leader stand up and make me not just feel good, plenty of them give that one a go, but actually believe that they can make a difference. They can make a seismic change. They're able to recalibrate the, frankly, fagging existence of our country in its current state and bring some life back to Blighty. How do we make Britain great again? 0344 499 1000. I want your genuine suggestions on, I mean, what is not working for you out there at the moment? What do you look at and think, man, I pay taxes for this. I pay half my money goes to the government, for goodness sake. In some cases, more than half of your money goes to the government. The taxes are getting more demanding and the services are, frankly, on their knees. That, I'm afraid, that is a wrong and inaccurate and unacceptable relationship with the state. It is not meant to be like that. And it's certainly, in the 21st century, is not meant to be like that. When my nan had a more efficient, straightforward and workable and working lifestyle, something has gone wrong. And she was probably born in like 1903 or something. Our lines are open. This is Talk. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Isabel Oakeshott, Talk's international editor, is back with us. Isabel, good afternoon.
You really depressed me with that list of it.
I am sorry.
I mean, I was going to say everything that's wrong, but of course it's only a fraction of what's wrong. But I mean, it's true though, isn't it? Everywhere you look, things don't really work. People are exasperated. And at the same time, we've got Keir Starmer writing in the Daily Telegraph today, and I'm just going to quote from this, putting every pound towards the priorities of working people. Really? Every pound? Yeah. Really? I don't think so. I mean, this is the government that's spending 100 million on a bat tunnel with HS2. So, I mean, not one of those pounds is money well spent. And there are plenty of other examples, literally thousands of examples every day in government of our money not going towards the priorities of people.
Indeed. Well, as my old nan used to say, never give a bat its own tunnel, it will only end in tears. Turns out she was right, Isabel, goodness me. I mean, you're right, I love a bat, but 100 million quid on a tunnel? Come on, something's wrong here. Let's have a listen to our Prime Minister then, in action today, talking about the British state being overcautious and flabby. Here's Keir Starmer in full action.
The NHS should be taken by an arm's-length body, NHS England. And I can't, in all honesty, explain to the British people why they should spend their money on 2 layers of bureaucracy. So today I can announce we're going to cut bureaucracy across the state, focus government on the priorities of working people, shift money to the front line. So I'm bringing management of the NHS back into democratic control by abolishing the arm's-length body NHS England.
I swear, Isabel, there's a civil servant somewhere that advises the Prime Minister on when to roll your sleeves up during a speech. You know you're in for a bad one when the sleeves get rolled up. It's meant to mean masterful and purposeful. Usually means anything but. That was the enthusiastic Prime Minister Keir Starmer in action a little earlier today. He just can't do it, can he, really?
No, he can't. And if you should see the faces, those of our listeners that are also watching will have seen the absolutely stony faces of everybody behind him. This isn't really, I mean, yes, on the face of it, this is very radical. And in some ways, it's also controversial because NHS England was set up to take the politics out of the NHS. And many people will agree with that. You know, there will be divided opinions as to the extent to which it's a good idea to have the politics in the running of the NHS or not. But the idea was so that it can't be endlessly meddled with by the health secretary. That was the whole point of it. And broadly, it's worked okay. And I'm yet to be convinced that this restructuring is actually going to free up a lot of money. If it does, then that's a good thing. But NHS England hasn't always existed, and it did exist for a reason. So it remains to be seen whether this is actually going to make any difference for patients. I mean, the bottom line problem that we've got is that the NHS is trying to do far, far too much. It's trying to be everything to everybody with far too few healthcare professionals and far too many patients, and simply the numbers don't stack up.
Yeah, I bothered, as you do with these things in this world, as you will know, Isabel. Once this was announced, I went down the rabbit hole of looking at other similar economies and countries and how they run it. And some of the most successful, I feel I got a PhD in global health services in about 2 hours this morning. But what I noted was that the ones that do rather well, and I was Denmark in particular, and we know they did quite well during COVID, works so efficiently and so well because it doesn't let the government fully run it. It allows clinicians and those who know what the heck they're doing.
Yes, I mean, it's a complete fallacy to imagine that the NHS is the envy of the world and that the only alternative system is an American-style healthcare insurance system. Many countries have a kind of hybrid. In fact, I was unlucky enough to have a minor accident in the last few days in Israel, of all places. And I had to go to emergency care there, the emergency hospital, and I'll be writing about this in more detail. But to try to put a positive gloss on my minor accident, it was a fascinating insight into how A&E can work under another system. They have a target in the main emergency hospital in Tel Aviv, which is the biggest emergency hospital in the world. It only deals with emergencies. They have a target to initially see patients within the first few minutes of their arrival. And that means people like me who are just walking in, not people who come in on an ambulance, because obviously we try to, in the UK, see them pretty quickly. And then they have a second target that you're kind of through and out within an hour, or at least you've seen a proper doctor within an hour. Of course, we all know in the UK that you can easily sit for 4, 5, 6 or more hours in A&E, and then at the end of that, you may well end up on a trolley in a corridor. In Israel, it's a kind of it is a health insurance system, but those who don't earn anything, those who have no means, have it paid for them. So it's basically done according to what your means are, which is really just a different way of taxation.
Indeed. Let's move to this story. I know you've got some opinions on this. The civil war within Reform UK continues. Leader Nigel Farage and suspended MP Rupert Lowe, of course, at the centre of all of this. A JL polling survey reveals 86% of Brits and 70% of the party's voters don't even recognise Rupert Lowe. It's worth having a little listen here to Guy Miscampbell from JL Polling with more of these findings.
I think about 25 to 30% of people can name their MP, let alone an MP from another party. And name recognition is very low. It takes a long time to build up a brand and to build up knowledge of who you are, no matter how good and how impressive you are as an MP. And so this story would need to run a lot longer, and I think Rupert would need to have been established a lot more to have a higher level of recognition. I think the one figure that did surprise me was only 29% of Reform voters knowing who he was. I think that's the bit that's really surprising.
I never know what the relevance is of those kind of recognition questions. I'm not surprised when lots of people say, I don't recognise my MP. If I showed a picture of Keir Starmer to my sister, she wouldn't have a clue who he was. She'd probably think he's the fella that lives opposite or something. Did this surprise you at all? Given the context of this, of course, Isabel, that, you know, Reform can't lose Rupert Lowe because he's the big hitter. But apparently most Brits didn't recognise him.
It didn't really surprise me because, as a commentator said there, I mean, public recognition of politicians is pretty woeful. I mean, most people feel that they've got better things to do with their lives than follow the ins and outs of politics day to day. And, you know, they barely follow, I'm talking about the majority of people, barely follow, you know, the few main headlines, the really big deal headlines, never mind some petty squabble between the people at the top of the Reform Party. And the commentator was right. It takes ages to build up a brand. And this is why I think it's always tremendously naive when people, when they go off in a strop, as has happened with Rupert Lowe, they talk about setting up, or they make noises about setting up their own party. It's really, really damn difficult to build a political party from scratch and get that recognition for the party, never mind the people that are in the party. And you know, you said at the opening, Ian, that I've got some opinions on this story, and I do, and I think they'd be the opinions that are shared with many of our listeners, which is A, that Rupert Lowe has done a really good job in some areas as an MP, and he works really hard, and that's great. But B, can we just end this stupid row? You know, because there are so many big things that the Reform Party needs to do to save the country, and so many people are putting their greatest hopes for saving the UK into Reform. And every day that this horrible fight goes on is a day that is a distraction from the main business.
Yeah, and I do wonder, I've said this consistently over the last couple of days, I don't actually think ultimately when this is blown over that it will make a difference. I know we've had, you know, some disgruntled Reform voters who, you know, said, I don't want anything to do with this party anymore. I still believe that if you walked into a polling station tomorrow and you were previously a Reform voter and those parties were on the ballot paper and Reform was there, I think most of those people will still vote Reform. I don't think this is devastation.
I agree with you. I think when you're, you know, when there is a huge storm like this and it's a Westminster thing and everyone's getting themselves in a right old pickle and all the commentators that are writing the newspapers know all the characters and the personalities concerned, everyone gets themselves into a right old twist about it. And, you know, I don't want to say it's no big deal at all because Reform only has 5 MPs. And, you know, to have 20% of those, as many have pointed out, kind of peeling off to do their own thing and having a right old go at the party leadership is not exactly edifying. So I wouldn't have said it's been the party's finest hour. Yeah. But does that mean that all those people that are desperately looking for an alternative are suddenly going to go, oh, actually, you know, Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe had a fallout, so actually I think I'm just going to vote Labour.
Yeah, I'll become a Lib Dem. You know, that's not going to happen.
I just can't see that. You know, people are a little bit more mature than that, I think.
Yeah, spot on. Isabel, stay with us. More to come. We'll talk Donald Trump and that curious threat to Russia. Also, the latest on Trump's tariffs. An extraordinary tariff just been announced for European alcohol, potentially. Details on that to come. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 24 minutes after 1 o'clock. Isabel Oakeshott is with us, Talk's international editor. Just as we came on air, Isabel, Donald Trump retaliating to the EU's 50% tariff on US whiskey. Trump has now threatened a 200% tariff on European alcohol in response. He doesn't muck about, does he, Donald? He's just like, right, let's pick a number. What's going to really kill them and get them to change their mind? 200%. It's going to go on a bit like this. I'm sure it'll change, but this seems to be the direction of travel.
I mean, I think we've got to just share Donald Trump's statement, or a bit of it anyway, because it's so funny. He says the European Union, one of the most hostile and abusive taxing and tariffing authorities in the world, formed for the sole purpose of taking advantage of the United States, not quite true, has just put a nasty 50% tariff on whiskey. If it's not removed immediately, the US will shortly place a 200% tariff on all wines, champagnes and alcoholic products coming out of France and other EU represented countries. This will be great for the wine and champagne business in the US. Well, it would be. I mean, it would be absolutely devastating if it happens. He hasn't half thrown the cat amongst the pigeons with that one.
Yeah, just a little bit. And as if that wasn't enough, he's giving the Kremlin a bit of kind of Zelensky treatment now. This is the first time, really, we've seen the president really have what could
even-handed.
Yeah, because he's been accused of, you know, hang on, what about Russia? You've said nothing about Russia. What are they, friends? Are you a puppet of Putin, etc.? Well, he was clearly saving it up for the big moment. And today, we know the Kremlin rejected calls for a ceasefire with Ukraine, arguing it would merely give Kyiv time to sort of regroup and rearm. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has threatened severe economic consequences for Russia if Putin refuses to engage. Let's have a listen to Mr. Trump.
I can do things financially that would be very bad for Russia. I don't want to do that because I want to get peace. I want to see peace, and we'll see. But in a financial sense, yeah, we could do things very bad for Russia. It would be devastating for Russia, but I don't want to do that because I want to see peace. And we're getting close to maybe getting something done. We've got Ukraine done, and as you know, I've always said that Ukraine might have been the more difficult party. You were here a week ago when some interesting things happened. I had somebody that didn't seem to want peace. Now he's agreed to peace. So we'll see what happens.
Well, I mean, no one on the planet, politically speaking, Isabel, operates like this. But, you know, he's brought it to the table and could succeed. But Russia, bit of a sticking point now.
I mean, this is a completely novel approach to diplomacy, and it actually abuses the word diplomacy, doesn't it? He doesn't do diplomacy. He simply does carrot and stick. And as you say, there's not been any sign of the stick against Russia until now. And I think it's rather belated. And Russia is saying, actually, we don't want a short-term ceasefire. We only want something long-term that's sustainable and reflects Russia's interests. And let's see if Trump ratchets it up further. I mean, he's threatening about economic sanctions. Well, there already are very punitive sanctions, so I'm not quite sure what he has in mind there. I think what the EU and the UK, more importantly, would like to see would be the ability to actually use some of those frozen assets to help Ukraine at this point. I think it's 300 billion. I mean, huge sums of money that are tied up Russian assets. That would be painful. That would hurt if a system were found to actually release some of that money. Yeah, all of that money, ideally.
Well, it's going to be anything but dull over the coming weeks on this one. I was about to say let's lighten things up with a bit of Disney, but I don't know whether it is that light. Disney's scaling back the Hollywood premiere of its Snow White remake following a string of controversies, including cast disagreements over Gaza. I mean, who would have thought that would even be a headline? The cast are disagreeing over Gaza. Really? How is that a thing? Nonetheless, let's have a little snippet, I should say, of the trailer.
It's a human.
What did you think I was?
Nothing. Ghost. be safe from the Queen here.
The Queen stole everything from all of us. We're gonna need your help. It's time to restore our kingdom.
It's time to restore the kingdom. There it is, the non-binary Snow White.
It's time to restore the United Kingdom. I think we can all get on board with that. Are you going to be going along to the movie?
Do you know what? I might just swerve it on this occasion. I mean, I saw a little bit of the other one quite recently on Disney, and I mean, it looks quite old now, just in terms of visually speaking. But these were beautiful films and stories, and nobody was kind of sitting down with a little tick box, and there was no HR department saying, oh, you haven't got someone in who ticks this box of identity, or there's not somebody who represents this particular community. You know, we didn't faff around back in the day. I think life was better for it, frankly.
I mean, I'm surprised the movie's still called Snow White, aren't you? I mean,
but yes, indeed. Yeah, which is it's discriminatory with the word white, and frankly, meteorologically speaking, I'm afraid why should snow get all the glory here?
I know. I'm sure we could come up with some alternative there. But odd that the cast are falling out over politics. I mean, that whole industry is so woke, as we know. It's just a complete kind of nest of vipers when it comes to politics.
Indeed. Just finally, Isabel, you said you've been in Israel recently. I'm sure it wasn't a holiday. You're a diligent international journalist. What were you doing there?
Well, I was doing so many different things, getting up to speed with the latest position. We had some very interesting briefings from the IDF, some very interesting briefings from intelligence sources, from the security services there. I was yesterday morning in Hostage Square, which is a kind of scene where the relatives, certainly representatives of families who still have loved ones in captivity, and even relatives of those who've come home, gather, and people show solidarity in the continuing fight to bring the remaining hostages home. And I hadn't realized, I mean, it's a hell of a scene there. They've got a whole what they call a Shabbat table laid out for I think 60 places, maybe more than that, for, with empty places for the hostages, symbolizing that desire to bring them home and come together. They also have a kind of makeshift replica of a Hamas tunnel in the Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, and you go inside that and it's quite eerie. They've reproduced the sound of artillery overhead, and the whole thing is papered with pictures of the missing ones. So it was a really incredibly informative visit, and I was left with the sense that the most Israelis are quite depressed, I think, not just by the fact that there are still hostages in captivity and the bodies of loved ones, but also by the lack of the sort of paucity of progress on this. There's no obvious solution, and Hamas, whilst a little bit debilitated, is by no means been eliminated.
Yeah, spot on. Isabel, thank you as ever. Isabel Oakeshott is Talks International editor with us. To kick things off with the big stories of the day, you want to comment on any of that? We're all ears at this end. The big question we threw out at the beginning, just listening to this sort of speech from take out the NHS element. We're going to talk about that in just a second. We'll talk to Jamie Jenkins on the economics of this, and we're also going to be joined by a senior consultant from the NHS, in fact, co-founder of the National Health Party. So I'm sure he's got a big view on this. Clive Peedle will be with us. But actually, the speech itself about kind of recalibrating Britain, getting rid of the flabby bits, which is a curious turn of phrase, and what you really wanted from it was a bit like going to the, I mentioned it, I likened it to being a puppy watching its master, waiting for, something good to happen, or being the parent at the school day when your kid's not the one that's going to win the running race, but man, do you want him to give it its best shot. I felt like all of those things watching Starmer. I got none of it back. There was no sense of, wow, this man is amazing, he's going to make stuff happen. What has happened to our country? What has gone on? I mean, just give me examples of where it's not working, by the way. But also, how do we put it right? How do we make Britain great again? 0344 499 1000.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
How do we make Britain great again? Re-engaging with the public. Keir Starmer a little earlier telling us that the place is all too flabby. It's all over the place, and we need to get a dose of reality. One area was the NHS, of course. He's announced plans to abolish NHS England, claiming it will cut bureaucracy and bring the health service under democratic control. The PM says the move will refocus the NHS on patients, free up funds for nurses, and put it back at the heart of governments. Well, back in the day, before NHS England, many argued that was the problem, that it was at the heart of government, hence NHS England. However, they're trying a different way now. He also vowed to streamline a flabby public sector to let the government operate with maximum power. In a moment, Clive Peedle, consultant clinical oncologist, also co-founder of the National Health Party. We'll get his take on what is happening on the health aspects of this story. But on the wider issue, Jamie Jenkins, political and economic commentator, with us. Jamie, good afternoon to you. Nice to have you on. I mean, this is all about apparently saving money, ultimately. I get a little bit wobbly, a bit nervous when politicians say, we're going to abolish this quango. You know that phrase, the bonfire of the quangos? Because what usually happens, they do abolish the quango, but they set up another one over there, which has just got faces that they are more familiar with. They give it a different name, and you just have a new quango.
No, Ian, good afternoon. Yeah, that pretty much is what you've summed up there, what happens generally. And I suppose if you break down what the Prime Minister and Wes Streeting are talking about today, it's quite clear, we've discussed this many times in the past, that the NHS need some form of reform. So you can't criticise them for trying to do something, I suppose. That's the first thing. And these layers and layers of management that obviously you've got in NHS England, ultimately it's going to cost in the short term to get rid of people, because obviously there'll be redundancy packages and settlements to pay people off. So they'll cost money in the short term. And you're right, that might just be a case of replacing some people on the left side of and then replacing them on the right side, for example, in terms of moving people around. So that's part of the issue. But I think ultimately what we haven't heard really, Ian, is what are they going to do differently other than abolish NHS England? In Wales, the Labour Party have been running the NHS for a quarter of a century. I've heard nothing about what they're going to do differently, just perhaps in Wales, where they've had the opportunities to do things differently. So you've got to give them some leeway to do some reform, Ian. But is this just an announcement? But there's no real detail of what does this really mean for the patient? Yeah. Changing the management structure is one thing, but what about the patients? That's all that really matters, isn't it?
Yeah, and of course, governments are trying to, in fairness to this one, like any other, they don't dispute they want to balance the books. That would be ideal. When you look at the civil service, and not just the health department, but all of the departments collectively, I mean, it's so big, 130,000 extra since Brexit, as I understand it. There might be reasons for some of that, but we do have a pretty steep annual bill just for employing the people to make things work properly. Now, how much of that is... I mean, if Elon Musk was there, we know what he'd probably do. He'd just cut it in half and say, well, we'll make it work somehow. I'm not suggesting that's a good way to do things. I'm sure he's, too far the other way. But is it widely seen, do you think, that there is a lot of wiggle room here to save serious money?
Well, I've worked in the civil service in the past year, and there's definitely a lot of waste in the civil service. We do need to move with the times. And it's not just the cost of day-to-day running of public services. It's also the long-term costs when you factor in things like public sector pensions, because people will build up pension contributions, which will add burden in the future, because if the government doesn't put money aside today for that, they'll add further burden in the future. But I do think we do need some radical reform. And remember 2010, when George Osborne and David Cameron came in, they started culling the civil service. We had an increase, obviously, then partly to do with Brexit and replacing some of the roles there. And then in particular, the health service, we saw all the expansion, for example, when we had things like the COVID pandemic and trying to manage that as well. So I think we've got to get on top of things. AI is being moved in the US to try and cut a number of roles. That will have opportunity to do things more efficiently in the UK as well. And I think the government really needs to get on top of this, because what you've got to remember, Ian, and this is one thing important for the viewers and the listeners as well, is that you can only have a public sector and fund the public sector if you've got a thriving private sector. And the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have not got economic growth coming anytime soon with the economic plans that they got in. So you're going to have to cut the public sector because there's no sign the private sector is going to be able to fund what we currently have. And that's ultimately, I think, the balance that government's kind of got at the moment.
And just a final question, briefly, if we can, Jamie, on the wider issue of the economy, how is it looking out there? You know, we get all these differing reports. I mean, everybody wants to turn a corner. Everything's very expensive, cost of living crisis. Many people can't work because a growing number of people can't work because they're sick, and mental health issues in another stratosphere in terms of numbers. What's the long-term view of where we're at the moment as a country? We're asking the question this afternoon, how do we make Britain great again? I mean, what's the economic picture?
Well, it's not looking too good, Ian, because obviously we've got these tax rises that were announced in the budget and the autumn statement recently, you know, in terms of they're going to come in with national insurance. That increases the cost to employers, and then that might have an impact on wage growth because they need it, or prices might go up. We've seen inflation creeping up recently. I suppose the one silver lining is the energy prices are not as high as they were, you know, during the height of the cost of living crisis, but they're still a significant burden when you compare what they are. They are going back up again shortly to what they were before the pandemic. So ultimately, if you want to get growth in the economy, Ian, rather than tax people more, we need to get more money into people's pockets to go and spend. And I think the sentiment among consumers isn't great at the moment. They're a bit worried because we're not getting that growth. And ultimately, you start talking yourself into low economic growth when you've got that low sentiment. So the government really need to get something to boost the economy. I don't think they're going to roll back on the tax increases that we've got. And unless you get that tax burden down on the public, they're not going to spend the money.
Maybe it's that chlorinated chicken deal from the States that we need after all. We'll watch with interest. Listen, Jamie, thank you as ever. Jamie Jenkins, political and economic commentator. And let's get a word specifically on the NHS story today. Clive Peedle is a consultant clinical oncologist, co-founder of the National Health Party. Clive, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon, Ian. Thanks for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. Well, we haven't spoken for some years, so it's nice to have you on the programme. Listen, I mean, look, the NHS will forever be analysed and over-analysed, and everyone's an armchair general on these issues. Oh, it could be done like this, and why don't we take the French system or the German system? The Israelis seem to do rather well with their system, etc. How big is this announcement today that's been announced by the Prime Minister?
Yeah, I think it's obviously a very significant announcement, but we're all wondering, what's going to come in its place. You'd think that we probably had enough of top-down reorganisations, but I think most clinicians are probably quite happy, to see a Andrew Lansley reform sort of abolished, because this goes obviously back to the Health and Social Care Act that was, widely opposed at the time, and we warned about what the problems, it may cause. But obviously, you still need to have something in place, and we need to see what those plans are before we can, start being, happy about the future of the NHS. Because as your previous speaker Jamie alluded to, there's still huge problems.
Yeah. Do you know, my day was going rather well, and then you mentioned Andrew Lansley. I'd forgotten all about Andrew Lansley, for goodness sake.
That was a £4 billion top-down reorganisation, and
Yeah.
It was widely recognised as a disaster, even within the Tory party itself. They realised it was a mistake. But really, I mean, the real problems with the NHS actually go back further. In my opinion, it goes right back to 1990 and the purchase provider split, which was brought in by Thatcher. Now, we all agree, well, a lot of your viewers will agree that actually markets work beautifully in the vast majority of industries, and that's the most efficient way to run an economy. But actually markets, are really incredibly inefficient in public services, and they actually create a huge amount more bureaucracy. And the amount of bureaucracy that was created by the purchase of provider split, splitting up general practice from secondary care, has been an abject failure. And Labour haven't learned the lessons either. So I haven't got a lot of faith in, Wes Streeting. Who's he brought in to advise him? Alan Milburn. And actually, I did an interview in the BMJ a while back, and they said who was the worst health secretary in living memory, and I actually said it was Alan Milburn, because he.
This is a list that has Andrew Lansley in it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So this is a Labour minister that was just driving the privatisation agenda. Yeah. And I'm not against the private sector as in separate from the NHS, but bringing in competition is not how you deliver healthcare services. So whatever Labour come up with, if it's a competitive type system, that isn't going to work. You need collaboration. We need to join up the NHS with social care. I think you need regional health boards, and then you do actually need oversight nationally, where you can have the appropriate, clinical oversight. But the national oversight needs to be, driven by the health secretary, but at the same time with a huge amount of clinical advice. But Wes Streeting isn't listening to clinicians; he's listening to, Tufton Street and Policy Exchange. I'm sending a message to Labour here. Do not go down that route. Listen to the clinicians. We've got the answers. I'm the armchair person with the answers who you talked about earlier. We've got the policy there. They just have to look at the National Health Action Party policy.
Isn't the problem, Clive, though? Yeah, I mean, you're at the coalface of things. You know your way around your area. You're an expert in this, a very respected oncologist. You know how to read a scan. You know what a diseased lung looks like. You make people better. Sometimes you deliver bad news. Sometimes you deliver great news. All of those things that you do, and that's fantastic. But it's often said that never give the checkbook to the talent. They certainly say it in my industry because the place would be broke within a fortnight, because this studio would look very different. It'd be 10 times the size. I'd have a bar over there and all sorts of things would be going on. Is it not the same in the NHS that, although it sounds rather seductive and even obvious that, just ask the clinicians what needs to be done, some argue that in politics, actually, that's sometimes the last place you go to?
I mean, I think that's a very fair point, Ian. Obviously, you could argue, well, don't put it in the hands of the BMA, because the BMA represents the interests of doctors, and it would just be all about pay rises. Yeah. But actually, within the BMA is a brilliant policy unit, actually, who've got great ideas. OK, the BMA is about doctors, that's fine. But if we can separate that and have policy talks, but also with the Royal Colleges and the specialist groups as well, involve those, and then it's not just about doctor self-interest, and it's obviously other healthcare professionals are involved, the nursing profession and the allied healthcare professions, and obviously the non-clinical staff are a big part of that. So we're not saying that we should set policy, but we should be involved in an advisory role. And sometimes speaking to the grassroots, is a good idea. I mean, the former Simon Stevens actually came to my hospital. He was interested in listening to what we had to do, and he helped us introduce new radiotherapy techniques, which is what NHS England is stopping us doing at the moment. I'll just give you a clinical example. For prostate cancer, at the moment, we brought in Middlesbrough, where I work, a treatment where we can treat prostate cancer with 5 treatments of radiotherapy. And over the years, the national standard have been to give 20 treatments. We've got waiting list problems, so if you can deliver it in 5 instead of 20, not only is it cheaper, it's better for the patients. Yeah. And we know this is a new standard of care. But NHS England has now got it out to consultation, whereas it'll prove a new drug straight away. We've been waiting, 6 months, 8 months. It's going to be another year before we get, the go-ahead. Just at top level, make the decision, do this, because we need to address the waiting list now. And that has been the problem with NHS England, and that's why I'm not going to be sorry to see it go, although we do need something, excellent put in its place.
Yeah, indecision in bureaucracy. I mean, who'd have thought it, for goodness sake? Let's hope that whatever happens next really is an improvement. Clive, great to have you on, sir. Thank you. Clive Peedle, consultant clinical oncologist. And I do hear this a lot from clinicians, that they are pulling their hair out with, like, why don't they just do what we do? I know they're not the only port of call when it comes to trying to work out how to make the NHS more efficient. Ultimately, that's what Clive's position is. He's a doc, he's a consultant. He wants to just make people better in the most efficient manner. Getting to that stage en masse across the country, it's not an easy thing. NHS England will go, the government will control what they were previously controlling. Of course, NHS England began in order to remove it from the government so that you didn't have this kind of political interference on an ongoing basis. Thoughts on that, though? It feeds into the wider question that this all came part of Keir Starmer's speech, of course, a little earlier, about wanting to get our country back on its feet. How do we do it? What's the process? How do we make Britain great again? 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
We'll get a view on this in a second from a political perspective. But before we do, let's get a voice note. This is from Nigel.
I'll give you an idea how to make Britain great again. I think every decision should go out to the entire voting public. If you have watched the debate, you get a live link on your smartphone and you can vote, because these debates have stopped being debates where you convince one side or the other as to who is right and who is wrong. They're just shouting matches between the two parties getting nowhere.
Well, that seems about right. So what do the other parties make of this? Keir Starmer criticising the British state as overcautious and flabby, arguing record spending and taxation has failed to improve frontline services. The Prime Minister pledged sweeping reforms of the overstretched, unfocused civil service and vowed to cut the cost of government regulations. Also announced, of course, some would say controversially, the abolition of NHS England, bringing health service directly under government control. Let's speak to an opposite number. Alex Burkhardt is the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Conservative MP. Alex, good afternoon to you, sir.
Hi, Ian. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. Nice to have you with us. Well, your response, if you could, to the overarching theme, if you like, to Mr Starmer's speech.
Yeah, look, just moving the bureaucracy around doesn't fix the problems of the bureaucracy. So just moving NHS England into the Department of Health doesn't on its own fix anything. And if you go back in, you probably remember 2013 when NHS England was constructed. The idea was to move the bureaucracy out of Whitehall, where it was being choked by internal process, and sort of set it free. And that didn't really work, right? Because what happened was the Department of Health ended up trying to micromanage NHS England from without. Now, there's a very strong case to have an entirely different working culture, not just within the NHS, but within the civil service generally. That would create more productivity, perhaps bring in more external expertise, and take you to a point where you had a smaller number of officials who were perhaps better trained and better paid and more productive. But I'm not yet convinced that what Labour's announced today is going to do that. I think that this is, although there might be a good idea in there somewhere, this is just moving the deck chairs around. We haven't heard from the Prime Minister what he intends to improve for patients by doing this. He hasn't set himself any targets or outcomes. It's just at risk of being a bureaucratic exercise. So and if you look at where Labour have done this already, where NHS England was never created, is Labour-run Wales, which has the worst waiting times anywhere in the country and the worst patient outcomes. So, changing the bureaucracy around on its own doesn't do anything.
What about the finances on all of this? The idea of Mr Starmer's speech was to have his own kind of Doge moment. This was Starmer in full Musk gear, I guess, saying, it's flabby, curious choice of words, but it's flabby and we want to slim it down. It's very hard for a Conservative to oppose at least the notion of what he's saying.
I mean, look, the Prime Minister uses all sorts of words and they're often not connected with reality. And I don't... as I say, just making an announcement like this and assuming that everything is suddenly going to get better is bogus, right?
Yeah.
The whole point of Doge is to have a system where a group of people come in from outside and make swift assessment of whether the system is as efficient or effective as it can be, and if not, move it on. What the government is really proposing today is to move NHS England, which is a quasi-independent body, into the heart of the bureaucracy. So this is going to require some considerably more radical thinking.
Is there not? I was just about to mention Eric Pickles, and then I just suddenly remembered you are the continuation of Eric Pickles, of course.
I am the new Eric.
You are the new Eric of some time now, of course. But Eric Pickles, back in, I think it was 2010, we had him on for something, and he was saying, look, we'll have a bonfire of the Quangos, because everyone likes that expression, the bonfire of the Quangos. It usually just means, though, you get rid of a load of, I was saying this to a previous guest, you get rid of like all of those Quangos and then sort of start some new ones of your own with more friendly faces. And, you know, somebody went to university with us. I mean, they're really good. You know, old Basher is great at the economics of things. So we'll get him in the play. Isn't that what usually happens? A government's mostly clueless about saving money because it's not your money.
Well, you know, it's all of our money. It's all of our. It's my constituents' money. And that's, you know, my constituents in Brentwood and Ongar in Essex, where Eric was the MP for 25 years before me. And yeah, my constituents are very very conscious of what happens to their tax. It's my duty to stand up for them, make sure that it's spent properly. But there is a place in the ecosystem of government for some arm's length bodies. You don't want everything run out of government departments.
Fair point.
But you're right that there is these things become fashionable, and you end up putting everything in arm's length bodies, and then suddenly one day the government wakes up and finds that it's not in direct control of anything.
Yeah, and that is the fear, that maybe this government will wake up and realise they're not in direct control. Alex, I have to step in there. Apologies for talking across you. Alex Burkhardt is the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Thank you to him. More coming from you next on Talk.
Across the UK, on on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yes, welcome back to the programme. Loads to get through this afternoon. We are, of course, talking about Keir Starmer. He's vowed to abolish NHS England, condemning it as the world's largest quango, he says, declaring war on what he calls flabby, unfocused and an overcautious state. I wanted more meat on the bones from the Prime Minister. I wanted sunny uplands. I wanted oven-ready deals. I wanted some positivity. I wanted him to tell me how we can make Britain great again. I'm going to throw that question to you. 0344 499 1000. Also this afternoon, Donald Trump has warned of a 200% tariff on French wine and champagne. This is in response to the EU's decision to impose what he calls a nasty tax on American whiskey. That's his response. More on that too. And the legitimacy of conditions like ADHD and dyslexia are being challenged with claims they lack objective diagnosis and grant undue advantages. Peter Hitchens was on Mike Graham's show this morning making this very point. He's written a whole column about it. We'll speak to one author, commentator and speaker who knows all about this area, and she profoundly disagrees. More on that to come. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. 5 minutes after 2 o'clock. So let's get back to it. Loads of comment coming in. Michelle says, how to make Britain great again. Great, get rid of Labour, turn the boats around, give our young couples a future and save our energy and food stability. Everything's gone up in price. One from Sally, the government is going to be in control of the NHS. Are we likely to see the introduction of two-tier healthcare? It's a very good point. Two-tier something. And Yvonne in Solihull says, how to make this country great again, topple these woke universities, dissuade bright students from going there. We have bred a nation of simpletons, pathetic youth who couldn't wire a plug, she says. Some would say they've always said that about new generations. They don't know they're born. Maybe there is a bit of that as well. Let's speak to Alan Tolhurst, chief reporter at Politics Home, on this story and the other big stories of the day. I mean, Alan, firstly, Keir Starmer giving a speech in a public oratory. He's not, he's a fluent man. I don't know whether he's a man that instills, big smiles and that warm feeling in the pit of your belly. He's like a long list of other professional politicians. He doesn't sort of have that within him. So I wasn't, I suppose, in all honesty, expecting a moment where the country was going to start banging saucepans in the street because Keir had made a big speech. So it was a bit dull, but the essence of the speech was that he wants to, if you like, deflate a flabby state, in particular by using NHS England, that among other things.
Yeah, it sounds like he needs his money back from that voice coach he's been employing for such a long time.
I think so.
Yeah, you're right. And I think actually as rabbits go out of the hat, I think announcing the abolition of NHS England was a bold one. I mean, I was quite surprised that it did come. It wasn't really trailed at all. We knew there was going to be some job cuts there, but to announce it today was quite a surprise. I mean, not surprising that they've gone for it. We know that Wes Streeting, as Health Secretary, has been quite unhappy with kind of the sclerotic pace of change within the NHS that he's been trying to improve, and so in that sense, it's not a surprise that it's gone. I think, as you say, you're asking for sort of meat on the bones. So it wasn't necessarily a huge amount about where that money would be spent if this large quango NHS England is to be removed, where that money would necessarily go. And I suppose in that sense, Starmer still doesn't necessarily have a kind of a complete story to tell on this. He seems like he's sort of alighted on this idea of cutting lots of quangos, of cutting down the amount of civil service. It doesn't appear to have a sort of a coherent ideology really kind of behind it. So it remains to be seen kind of how far it goes. I know there's lots of pressure to cut things like the sentencing council. If the NHS, gets to run the NHS England is running NHS, not Department for Health. Why is the sentencing council deciding what sentences people get rather than the Ministry of Justice?
That's a great point.
Sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I think we could see further moves on this. We know the actual total number civil service, the headcount ballooned after Brexit Brexit and then the pandemic. So I think it was always naturally going to come down. It's whether kind of there's an ideology behind it, what kind of cuts this government looks to make, and as you say, whether the kind of the stuff underpinning it, that kind of story, the more positive story about where this government is going to take the country, I don't necessarily think has been fully fleshed out yet.
Yeah, and I think that was the point. I know this was about the economic components of the argument and the over sort of inflated civil service and all of that. So
the money that could be saved by using AI and that sort of thing.
And all of that. But there is still a sort of very real sense that when you think of something like NHS England, it was started specifically to stop politicians running the thing because they felt that hadn't worked for years. That also made it overinflated. Now the thing that replaced it has made it overinflated. The fear that I think most people have is that, once they put this thing under the control of the Department of Health and Number 10, it'll probably end up costing pretty much the same, and some suggest even more.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually, because obviously part of the reason why the NHS England exists as an arm's length body is because of the changes that the Tory coalition government made in the 2012 changes. And a lot of those were reversed in 2022 with their Replacement Health Act, but they couldn't quite roll that one back. And sort of privately, all the Tories really regretted doing that because they took that kind of control away. But it's interesting to say, how do you square with what Keir Starmer said about government treading more lightly on people's lives with kind of centralising control of something like the NHS, with having top-down decisions rather than it being kind of more, taken to more local levels? And obviously we've heard, Wes Streeting wants to kind of break the kind of hospital centralisation system that the NHS currently operates. Is by doing this, by getting rid of the NHS England, is that going to allow that? Or as you say, is it going to merely hive more power in, along on Victoria Street where the DHSC is based, as opposed to out into the country where health is actually being accessed by people?
Absolutely spot on. Let's move to this story. Starmer in race to secure trade deal with Donald Trump. There's all sorts going on at the moment with tariffs. Yeah. I mentioned there at the beginning, Trump just goes for the bullseye, doesn't he? If he's annoyed about something, he doesn't say, well, you've imposed a 20% tariff, so I'm going to impose a 21%. He says, no, I'm going to impose a 200% tariff on EU booze because you've scuppered us with this nasty. He calls it nasty. It's quite funny how somebody else's tariff is nasty, but his tariffs are the most beautiful word in the English language, I think he calls it.
Yeah, well, the cost of a champagne reception in Washington DC is going to go up significantly if this kind of goes through. But yeah, for the UK, when Donald Trump announced these 25% tariffs on steel exports, the European Union decided to announce these retaliatory tariffs, as well as the stuff on alcohol that we can discuss as well. But the stuff on steel, the government thought, well, let's not immediately retaliate, because there is an opportunity before April the 1st, when this comes into force, known as kind of World Tariff Day, it's being referred to. There is an opportunity to do something, to get a carve out. It's not happened yet, but I think because of how positively the talks went in Keir Starmer's trip to Washington DC, there is a feeling in Whitehall that they will be able to get something done. And for a long time, the UK was unable to get a deal with America post-Brexit, but there's a feeling that even if they don't get a full comprehensive free trade agreement, there could be something to be done before the end of the month. But it is a real race against time. And as you say, Donald Trump is quite capricious. He might, for example, decide tomorrow that, Scotch whiskey needs to get these kind of be hammered by tariffs in the same way that European champagne is and stuff. So it's kind of hard to know what they're doing, but clearly they didn't want to kind of spook the White House by going straight for these kind of retaliatory tariffs. But there's a big job for the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, who we might come on to as well. Big job for him to do in terms of trying to get something over the line in the next 3 weeks.
Yeah. Well, the trade deal is what I think some people are concerned about. I know it was always the sort of the litmus test was this chlorinated chicken argument that goes back some years. But whatever it happens to be, there is a sense that Keir Starmer will take anything because firstly, the headlines are, I've got a trade deal with America. Secondly, any tariffs completely disappear as a result of that, without necessarily working out whether this trade deal is going to be potentially damaging to farmers or whoever in this country, plus many other industries. But that appears to be the kind of what's in the sight of Mr. Starmer here. Get that trade deal and, we can make this one go away.
Yeah, and I think it might end up being something like a sector by sector deal to begin with. So the really thorny stuff, as you say, around agriculture and food standards, that might have to come a lot later. And there's lots of stuff to be done with individual states as opposed to just the federal government. But you could pick something like, say, AI, where the UK is much more aligned with America on regulation of AI than it is with the European Union, which is taking a much more draconian approach to regulation. So you could take something like that and use that as the basis for a kind of initial agreement, then move it on to something like steel and other things like that, rather than having to take the whole thing as a whole, because we know, from things like our potential agreements with India, it's taken so long to get those stuff done because of dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's, all that kind of stuff. It takes a long time, but you want to be able to get something over the line, as you say, both for a kind of a PR purpose, but also to prevent, we've already seen kind of the value of British steel go down as a result of these potential tariffs, which are yet to come in. So if the government can prevent that, then it will see that as a massive win, I suppose.
Yeah, and we don't want it to be just about chicken, of course. I mean, let's be honest, we've all, after a few pints, walked into one of those moody chicken parlours, the Walthamstow Fried Chicken Emporium or something, and, where there's doubtful there's any chicken in there at all. So
yeah, well, we were all eating horse meat for years without knowing it, weren't we? Anyway, so
absolutely. And apologies, by the way, if there is a place called the Walthamstow Chicken Emporium, which I'm sure is wonderful and delightful.
The News UK lawyers have been in your ear.
Absolutely, just in case. Let's talk about Jonathan Reynolds. He admits he was wrong to claim he'd been a solicitor, though it was quite curious. In the speech, he actually did call himself a solicitor while saying, "I'm sorry for calling myself a solicitor."
Yes, it was kind of strange, but he was referring to the fact that I think 10 years ago, he was actually a trainee solicitor, and he gave a speech where he talked to himself as a solicitor, which you wouldn't think is the crime of the century, but the word itself is protected because of its legal connotations. You have to be regulated by the SRA, the legal body, and it is an offence to claim that you are when you're not. It's not huge, but I think it plays into some wider kind of tropes. We know that Rachel Reeves had a lot of issues with her kind of a bit of CV washing and stuff, and there's a bit of issue about whether Jonathan Reynolds' CV on LinkedIn referred to himself as a solicitor when he wasn't. He said that he wasn't the person that wrote it, but it just looks a bit clumsy, a bit kind of foolish, and I think as well it plays into some wider problems that the government has had with kind of saying things that aren't necessarily entirely correct. And so it's a bit embarrassing if you have to stand at the dispatch box and apologise for saying you were something when you weren't. And not the crime of the century, but not necessarily when you've got big things like tariff wars with America to try and sort out with. Not something you have to want to spend your time on, basically.
That's very true. Although in fairness to him, I mean, how many trainee solicitors, especially if you're near the end of your training, who've been in a bar, they've spotted somebody across the bar thinking, "Oh, I think something could happen here between us." They wouldn't say I'm a trainee solicitor. They'd say I'm a solicitor, or they'd say I'm a lawyer, wouldn't they? That would be their line.
Yeah, I mean, look, cast the first stone. Those of us who have a CV which is 100% bulletproof, I think are very hard to find. I think everyone does a little bit of sanding of the edges on a CV. It just becomes a bit more tricky when you've got to stand up in Parliament and explain it.
Yeah, fair point. Listen, great to have you on as ever, Alan. Thank you. Alan Tolhurst is chief reporter at Politics Home. Comments coming in from you, and we're going to talk about the ADHD story in a bit. Because this is an intriguing one. Dyslexia was where the story started, with Peter Hitchens claiming in a column that dyslexia isn't really a thing. You can teach people to read and it won't be a problem. Joanna in Salisbury says, dyslexia does exist. My whole family has it, including 3 daughters who all had private tuition because the school wouldn't help them until 9 years old. Far too late to catch up, hindering them with all the schoolwork. The most important thing was to bring them up with self-belief, not to treat it as a handicap, but to achieve in other directions. My daughters all have extremely good, well-paid management jobs. I know loads of, one of my little boy's best friends is dyslexic. I mean, that's not invented. That's not because the parents or the teachers didn't teach him to read. He was taught in exactly the same way as his other siblings. And I mean, there's clearly something there. Peter Hitchens then moved it on to ADHD this morning when talking to Mike Graham. We're going to play a clip of that a little later. And that really did throw the cat amongst the pigeons. A lot of talk listeners and viewers getting in touch saying, what's this guy talking about? ADHD isn't real? Of course it's real. I think Hitchens' point is that there's no... if you did a blood test, you wouldn't be able to find it in that. If you kind of... the pathology bit isn't borne out. But I think there's a lot of parents out there, and also adults now, who go on, hang on a second, no, there's definitely a condition called ADHD. We'll talk to one writer, herself somebody who has ADHD, who explored this for years. She's written about it, she lectures about, teaches about it, but has a very different view to Peter Hitchens. We'll do that a little later in the programme. How do we make Britain great again is a bit of a theme we've formed here this afternoon. Graham's in Berkshire on this point. I mean, what's happened to this place, Graham? Afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. I mean, it's a bit much when Woking manages to get itself on Plank of the Week, isn't it?
Well, that's a very good point.
We waste money. 600 people working for the College of Policing. Plus another 400 seconded. Making nearly 1,000. Now, the 600 comes from the college's own website.
Yep.
But they don't actually say how many are seconded. The other comes from people having done analysis of LinkedIn. So I don't know how accurate the other 400 is.
Sure. We know there's a lot of people there.
Yeah. And we have a lot of quangos where money is being spent, which could be redirected to scientific applications within universities that are then backed up for turning into production. Yeah. Not like the TSR-2 that got sold to the Americans and became the F-111A. But we're not going to get people to take chances if they can't speak, say things that aren't actually politically correct, like, you know, the Earth isn't flat, which caused Galileo a lot of problems. And we're in a situation now where people are afraid to actually put their head above the parapet. Yeah. And the entrepreneurs are the ones who stick their heads above the parapets and take risk.
Every day of the week.
But the other thing is, the entrepreneurs put their money behind it and their backers behind it. Yeah. Nowadays, people like, I better not say his name, but he's a very famous eco millionaire. He gets an awful lot of money from subsidy.
Yeah, I don't think he gets any money actually in subsidy. I think there's a bit of an urban myth there, but that's another story. But I hear what you're saying. Look, I mean, do we need an Elon Musk on the case, do you think, Graham, and who could go through the system and properly root and branch, get rid of the nonsense? I know Elon Musk apparently has gone a little bit too far. I think he's firing people in charge of the nuclear button now, but nonetheless, he's, you know, the principle of what he's trying to do is say, look, we give too much money into crazy areas, we've got too many quangos and too many people in departments that don't need that amount of people. That's a fair basis to begin an investigation, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think that you can replace lower level people with AI, because even I'm dyslexic and I happen to be able to spot.
There's no
AI.
such thing as dyslexia. You do know that, Graham.
Sorry?
There's no such thing as dyslexia.
There's a word of 7 letters.
Absolutely. Well, you see, that debate began this morning on Mike's show. We're going to continue it in around about 20 minutes' time. Listen, Graham, thank you very much indeed for that. That's Graham in Berkshire on Broke Britain. How do we make Britain great again? Based on everything, I was really hoping for a moment from Keir Starmer. I thought, wow, we could all become Labour voters if he's going to pull something massive out the bag. And all he did was go, look, you know, we've got to save money. And it was, really? Yeah, it's all a bit flabby, said Keir. Great, you know, I think Martin Luther King can sleep safely in his grave, knowing that great orators of our time have not taken his place. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk 24 minutes after 2 o'clock. How do we make Britain great again? Chris is over here in Epsom. How you doing, Chris?
Yeah, as perplexed as you are, Ian.
Yeah, go on.
I've been thinking about this for a while as to where things are going wrong in different aspects of our life, our society in general. And really, I couldn't really put my finger on where it really went wrong. And then I watched David Starkey, our historian, and really he answered a lot of it. It really goes back to 1998, with Blair and Brown, when they set up the Supreme Court. They brought in the Human Rights Bill. Everything was tied into Europe, and we were tied into these international associations and memberships, if you like.
Yeah.
And if you wind it all back to that, prior to that, you had judges that only very occasionally turned up in the paper for a wrong decision. They certainly weren't challenged in the way they're challenged now.
True.
It certainly wouldn't have allowed for a woman to fail 7 times in an appeal and only win the 8th appeal because she joined a terrorist organisation that was a prescribed terrorist organisation in her country of origin.
Yeah.
All of those things, we need to I was going to say reformation, back to 90. We need to lose all of that weight that we're carrying. Get rid of the wokery. Completely get rid of the DEI. I mean, I understand and I appreciate what the DEI was meant to achieve, right?
How do we not already... I mean, the thing with the DEI thing, I mean, it sort of came on the back of, having made the country correctly unrecognisable from how it used to be, whether that was women in jobs, whether that was non-white people, whether that was gay people, whoever it happened to be. All of that wasn't just work in progress. In some areas, it was complete. I mean, they were already there. I mean, particularly on the gender issue. And yet, just as everything, and this is sort of, to me, I've always thought this, Chris, how kind of the pervasive left works in this area. Once you get it done, nobody shakes your hand and goes, fantastic job. They go, you ain't anywhere near, mate. We haven't started yet. And it starts again. It's almost like St. George trying to slay a second dragon. There isn't another dragon, but it carries on. And the DEI thing appears to me to be kind of so wildly out of control that any credibility it might have had in its essence that you were just alluding to has been completely obliterated.
It has, because what I was trying to say was to follow that up. Although I understand the reasoning behind it, what it's actually done, it's caused division and loathing between religions, between men and women, between it.
Well, you can't. I mean, it's a ridiculous notion. It's wholly anti-intellectual to say, right, here's a workplace, and this workplace must be represented by a group from every single demographic, predisposition, creed, colour, race, etc. It makes no sense. And the idea that companies have rolled over to adopt this, as everything from equality, race discrimination, equal pay, all of those issues, those boxes had been well ticked. Not perfect, we know that, but coercing almost via the rule of law companies into having to adhere to this for want of being, shamed or even closed down because of the show. Well, they're a racist company because they don't employ enough brown people or something. I mean, it's just a nonsense.
It is a complete nonsense, and it's making it difficult. I've got a really eclectic group of friends from different religions and different colours, and even they are saying that this is nuts. because even if they get a position on meritocracy, they're then viewed as somebody, well, they only got that because of DEI.
But it does. But exactly. So there's also that. But there's also the fact that what you end up doing is, I mean, class is the one that always gets missed out of these lists. So, you know, you end up employ somebody's disability, for example. If their disability is not, you know, major, but it's, and I'm sure it's a grievance to that individual, but it's not. It doesn't preclude them from, you know, walking or functioning in most conventional ways. If you're employing that person and they happen to be from an Oxbridge posh background and sticking them into some six-figure salary job at the BBC and then claiming you've somehow addressed equality, then that is also a nonsense. You know, it doesn't make any sense. Listen, Chris, I've got to fly. You've been great. Thank you, Chris in Epsom. Let's get a voice note on all of this from Judy.
Keir Starmer says he's going to tighten up the government. If that's the case, why, since he's been in power, has he invented 26 no quangos? And getting rid of NHS England, they'll do just what they did before. They'll move them all to another department. That was his idea of saving money. All smoke and mirrors.
Or smoke and mirrors. Don't mention smoke when you mention the NHS. It's bad for your lungs, kids. 0344 499 1000. Brand new Voice of Doom on its way a little later. More from you on the way. We threw that question out at the beginning. How do we make Britain great again? I mean, bearing in mind, you know, I kind of half thought, perhaps stupidly, that Keir Starmer's speech today would have a little bit of that in it. There'd be a little bit of vroom in the engine when it came to what he had to say. We didn't get any of that. We got a fairly dull announcement about everything's too flabby. Too flabby. That's it. Yeah, going to cut down, get the AI boys in. That'll save some jobs and we'll save a few quid. But nothing about, you know, we're back in business. Remember when Trump said America is back in business? It was so powerful, said with such passion and velocity. We don't get none of that. We just get too flabby. Bizarre times. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just gone 2:30. Welcome back to the home of Common Sense. Peter Hitchens, the journalist. Now, Peter appears on Talk from time to time, often with Mike Graham. He's been on with us a couple of times. A very persuasive, very mesmeric kind of speaker. speaks passion, speaks his mind, not always everybody's cup of tea, he knows that, sometimes divides the room too. He wrote a piece about, initially about dyslexia, that this is something that isn't really a thing. And he appeared on Talk This Morning with Mike Graham, and he's sort of ignited some controversy, questioning whether conditions like dyslexia and ADHD are legitimate. So although he was originally talking about dyslexia, he moved on a bit to ADHD, and that's the bit that certainly a lot of our listeners and viewers got in touch with Mike's show this morning, absolutely raging. So what's this man talking about? Others did agree with him. He argues that these kind of conditions lack objective diagnosis and unfairly grant certain privileges. Let's have a listen to what he said to Mike this morning.
And I don't, people say to me, oh, you say there's no such thing as ADHD. I'll just do that one briefly. And I say, well, and they say, come to my house and see how my child behaves. So I don't doubt that the child behaves very badly. The question is not that there is an awful lot of bad behavior among children now. The question is why it takes place and whether it's caused by this disease or affliction which you name, and whether it's in fact treated by giving that child an amphetamine imitator, or whether it's not. So I don't dispute that there are a lot of badly behaved children. Also, I absolutely don't dispute there's an awful lot of people who aren't able to read.
So that's his point, and he went on to quote, various papers and scientists who over the years have almost backed up this point. ADHD, is that invented then? Is that what he's kind of saying? Is it just like bad kids? Too much experience in my own world to know that I think that is probably wide of the mark. Let's speak to Leanne Maskell, founder of ADHD Works. Leanne, good afternoon to you.
Hi.
Nice to have you with us. You have ADHD. You didn't know this to start with. You went on a bit of a journey, worked it all out and realised I've got ADHD. Thanks to Peter Hitchens, I can tell you, you haven't got ADHD. There you go. What a great revelation on a Thursday morning.
Thank goodness for him. Oh,
yeah, indeed. Well, I mean, you would have probably heard this argument before, so I'm sure it's not new to you. Just give us your response then, firstly, when somebody says, look, this is not a thing. There's no way of... It's not a thing. Well, how do you feel about that?
I usually ask them why they care. If Peter Hitchens doesn't have ADHD or dyslexia himself, it's quite interesting that he cares so much to write these articles that are obviously very inflammatory, and I would suggest quite neurodivergent of him to do so, because he's obviously... Yeah, well, usually it's the people that see the most of their suffering in people like myself that are able to get that support, and people, the support is available there. It's not like I didn't go. If people are overdiagnosed with ADHD, etc., that's an issue to take up with the medical profession, the government. If they don't like the benefits, go to the benefits, go to the government, not the people that are seeking support, and the children, especially in school, that are struggling, and the parents that are struggling, and to shame them for that, I think it's a reflection of the person saying it.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because that term that has been used in the past as a pejorative when people say someone's on the spectrum, but let's take the pejorative out of it and just, Peter Hitchens is on the spectrum, right? I mean, goodness me, I've known him for years, Peter Hitchens, and I've always thought that somewhere, and to me, that's been oddly part of the attraction to him, that there's a lot of unconventional facets and elements to Peter Hitchens that makes him incredibly compelling and very interesting, and thinking outside the box and doing and saying things that perhaps not everybody else would. And so I thought there was a certain irony in him raising this. But broadly speaking, to respond to that, then what is ADHD? How do you define it?
Well, ADHD is said to be a neurodevelopmental condition that someone is born with, so you have it for your whole life, and this impacts obviously the attention, deficit, hyperactivity, inattention, but what I personally go by is this 30% developmental delay in executive functioning skills. So these are things like self-awareness, where we might say things that we know are going to trigger other people, but we don't care. We're gonna say what we think. Impulsivity, making very quick decisions. Like for me personally, that was what led my life to just fall apart. I couldn't keep a job or stay in the same country for more than a few weeks at a time. Like until I knew what I was dealing with, no matter what I did, the motivation. We might really want to do something, but just cannot engage our brains to do it. And it's not that these things are necessarily bad. And I really agree that the diagnostic criteria is highly outdated and misses women in particular. But also I think that it can be a strength. It's just a different way of thinking. And, you know, like you just said about Peter Hitchens, it's a difference. It's what makes someone interesting and wonderful, especially if they are privileged enough. And I think this comes into the socioeconomics a lot, to be able to access support or environments where that's not held against them.
His point seemed to be, or one of his points, Leanne, seemed to be that if we went to the doctors and said, you know, I need the ADHD test, you know, let's do some bloods, let's have a look, you know, scan whatever. He said you wouldn't find any evidence for that. That seems to be the kind of backdrop to his case.
There's no blood test that you can do for any mental health condition, like depression, anxiety, and there's no, it's all, so that's what I thought was really interesting about his article, because it's quite a neurodivergent way of looking at it, of like what is real. You know, us human beings, we've come up with certain terms that categorize things like cancer, right? Yes, we can all agree that cancer is real and that one can be identified by a scan, but we've still named it cancer. And so I think it's the same with things like ADHD, autism, but interestingly, I think Peter Hitchens has written somewhat about vaccines and autism. So it's like, if one of them exists, what is real? And I think when we're coming to ADHD, my approach, I was really surprised when I started this work at how much demand there was for support and how many people were struggling. And I had my own kind of, this shouldn't be right. And then in the end, I came to understand that actually if it helps people, if that word helps people, great. If that helps them not to necessarily go and get extra time in exams and all the benefits that people seem to think are just freely available, or medication that they hand out, which is very much not the case. If it helps someone to understand themselves and to live their life better, then that's a really good thing, I think.
So the reason we have more people with ADHD is because we are diagnosing it now. We're able to say this is what this is what is wrong, because there's a wider kind of, there's ADHD and then there's other similar, I don't know if the word is conditions, but there's similar situations that are not quite ADHD, but are a bit like ADHD, right?
Yeah, so I was actually diagnosed with autism last year. And then I was very shocked to find out that autism and ADHD have a 50 to 70% crossover in symptoms, and co-occurrence rates. So that means, on the flip side, people couldn't be diagnosed with autism and ADHD until 2018. So before that, the DSM excluded these conditions in the same person. In the UK, adults could only be diagnosed with ADHD from 2008. So that's why there are so many people now seeing that their challenges. Obviously, I think the pandemic had a huge impact because it changed how everybody lived their life, and they realized either that they were struggling or that things could be better. And that's led to people seeking support. But I don't think that the answer is to shame those people for that.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think Peter comes from a vicious place on this. I mean, he genuinely feels that we've sort of either misplaced our diagnosis, or we've overdiagnosed, or we're not addressing things that could be addressed. We're pathologizing something that could just be dealt with in a very simple way with a few basic changes to our lives. I guess your contention as somebody with ADHD is that you can't do that. It's no good. You know, logically you will know what the issues are and how maybe they're best to be dealt with, but something within you would mean that, you know, you wouldn't be in control of being able to change them. Is that fair?
Yeah, if we think of someone that is left-handed and we say, but you can just You can learn to be right. Why don't you just learn to be right-handed? Like, yeah, it might be a bit harder for you, but you could just learn. And you're kind of causing problems for everybody else because you're left-handed. Why do we have to make you your own special way of writing? It's like that. It's like going to someone and saying, why can't you just learn to get like? And then I think always the question I come back to, people like Peter Hitchens, I know that not writing to shame people and to get, obviously I think there is a degree of controversy and this is a very topical issue, but I don't think he really genuinely, I think the people come from their own places where they're coming from. But the question is always, why? Why? What is the problem if we are, if someone needs to have that diagnosis to be able to get support? It's an issue that I feel really strongly about because I think we are living in a time where mental health is awful, of everyone, not just neurodivergent people, but if you have, I talk to parents every day where their kids are having crises, where they are self-harming, where they're refusing to go to school, where they are suicidal. And I think that's a bigger question for our society of what support are they getting as people like Keir Starmer say we're getting rid of the NHS. Okay, that's lovely, but what are you going to do to help all of these people that actually need support there?
Yeah, I can remember being at school and seeing kids, displaying, I suppose, what you'd describe as unconventional behaviour. It might have been something like, I don't know, I can remember one girl always putting her hands over her ears when the classroom got loud, and I just, we just thought she was a bit odd. It's like, why is she doing that? What is wrong with you? We're kids, we're mucking around. But clearly, you look back at it now and you go, wow, that was probably a real problem to her. I don't know whether that falls into ADHD or something else, but I can totally see, as an adult now that could lose his mind, if somebody starts drilling outside my house on a morning, or, the volume of the TV is too loud, I want to bash my head against a wall. It's horrendous for me. So I have a sympathy with situations that, in the past we didn't necessarily understand, but, we've got a bit more understanding of it now, even if Peter Hitchens hasn't.
Yeah, and that's, ultimately everyone's got their own beliefs and that's fine. Yeah. These topics are really scary, I think, because the Panorama episode last year about ADHD and private assessments, etc., has led to many people having their access to support taken away from them, like medication. And when there are articles out there saying, everyone's been given these drugs, amphetamines, people are not given drugs. I get 30 days of my medication at a time, and every time I have to go and give my passport at the pharmacy. I have to remember to go and do that every month. I often forget whether I've even taken it. It doesn't make me feel like high in any way, but what it has done for me is before I took it, if I had a small problem, like if I had drilling outside my house, I would trying to kill myself. I was like, my brain would just go straight to
You're a fella drilling problem person, are you?
I can't do it, yeah.
Wow, I thought I was alone in the drill issue.
No, it's very stressful. And now I can be like, okay, I'll put on the headset, and that's really what it has done for me. And just because the medication or a certain kind of medication doesn't mean that they're bad. They've obviously helped people, and I think that's the question, is if it helps you, then go for the thing that helps you.
I do wonder now then, just to go back to Peter Hitchens, whether denying ADHD means you have ADHD. I don't know. I'm just loosely trying to diagnose Peter Hitchens here. I mean, his skin is thick, his shoulders are broad. He won't be offended by that, but
I think you might.
maybe that is the issue. Listen, Leanne, it's been great speaking with you. Let's speak again. Leanne Maskell, who is the founder of ADHD Works. Look them up. Check out the work that they do over there. I'm going to throw that question out because, as a father of a couple of kids of school age, this comes up a lot. I mean, a lot. And you look at your own kids and, I've got two who are very different. They've got some similarities. Younger one, he's more of a handful. It's tricky sometimes. Getting him to school, getting him to put socks on, things like that. Really tough stuff. And you speak to somebody and they'll go, oh, yeah, that's like a classic sign of the ADHD kid. And you think, well, is it? Or is he just being a bum because he's 5 or 6? Or is there something more going on there? I think they're probably, I don't know what name to give that. So if you didn't call it ADHD, call it something else. And you think, well, if you're brought up in a house that is, reasonably sane, or as sane as a house can be with two, children in it, both boys, then, but you take the point, then give it another name. What is it? I mean, there must be loads of adults listening to this now who are absolutely the classic case of someone going, I used to think this was nonsense, and then, you know, I went and checked it out, dug a little bit deeper. I think particularly for blokes who, although it does seem to be more boys who are diagnosed, that there might be a kind of reason for that. But there must be adults thinking, yeah, I thought it was nonsense, got myself checked out, turned out that, yeah, whatever this thing is, whatever name you want to give it, I absolutely have it because I tick every single one of those boxes. 0344 49. I've just thought about the drilling thing. The drilling thing. That's I can't. Well, Leanne, our last guest, said the same thing. It's a persistent noise. There's a fellow with a leaf blower outside our house. I want to put this man in jail. Or up the wrong end of his own blower, frankly, because that kind of stuff can send you nuts. But what does that mean? I just get annoyed with a leaf blower, right? Or a drill? I don't know. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just gone 10 to 3. So we've got a brand new Voice of Doom. For those of you new to the Voice of Doom, it's a mystery voice bit, but with always a political vibe. Could be a politician, could be somebody connected in some shape or form to the world of politics, domestically or internationally. It's a brand new voice. Here it is.
An election between the haves and the have-nots.
Wow. So that sounds like an older one to me, I think, maybe. But you could be wrong. Could just be a bad recording of a younger one. Here it is again.
An election between the haves and the have-nots.
Who is that? Whatever you do, call in. There is no prize, but you can message in if you fancy having a crack at this. That's fine. 87222. If we get a right answer, we will tell all on the other side of the news at 3. If we don't, it rolls over to tomorrow. Here it is again.
An election between the haves and the have-nots.
Who is that? Comments on that on the way. First, though, let's get a voice note on that issue of ADHD. It comes from John.
Hello, Ian. I'm a psychiatrist in Texas, and I have to agree with Ms. Maskell that there are no actual definitive blood tests that can diagnose ADHD, autism, any of the major psychiatric disorders. However, we do have fairly robust measures, questionnaires, etc., that can do that. So it is real. It does tend to be somewhat overdiagnosed, especially here in the United States. However, there are actual real cases.
There it is. John, thank you. A qualified voice, a psychiatrist from the wonderful state of Texas. Thank you, John, for that, sir. 0344 499 1000. Let's go back to that question on broken Britain. We asked the question, how do we make Britain great again? Matt's in Cheshire. Come on, Matt. I'm sure you can do this. What are your thoughts?
First of all, I'm also cat-handed.
Are you?
I am, yeah.
Only my dad, as a northerner, used that phrase, cat-handed. I don't know if it's a southern phrase, actually.
No, I think it was used in schools to sort of make it known that you were
somehow disabled.
Yeah.
Yeah. My dad always said that, you know, oh, you're cack-handed. It's like, yeah, that's weird. Nobody else really says that, cack-handed.
No, I'm a proud cack-hander, mate.
I'm a proud cack-hander, yeah. I wish I could write with my... You know, every now and again, as a cack-handed person, you know, when you're bored, you give it a go, don't you? You pick up a pen and try and write with the other hand and go, I wonder what will happen. Nothing, really. It's just a flipping mess. I mean, it's bad enough with my left hand, but the right hand, that doesn't want to know anything. Doesn't do ink.
I've got a list, Ian, of things to make Britain great again, if that's okay.
Yeah, please. Can't wait. Fire away.
By never allowing Labour and the Conservatives into power again, as they purposely tried to ruin Britain.
Fair point.
Deport the 1 to 3 million illegal immigrants and have no more immigration until it's done. Make universities 90% for British citizens and let any that argue against it go bump. Introduce and laud apprenticeships, making them attractive and worthwhile for young people. As Jordan Peterson said, start with the basics, like making your bed and tidying. So clean the streets properly, stop littering, and make communities respectable and decent again.
Good point.
Make those that want to live like pigs live in places for pigs only. Regarding advocate reading, sport, and conversation over the internet. Give the police and the CPS the powers to be brutal and uncompromising on extreme violence and criminality. Bin activist judges. Repeal the Human Rights Act and leave the ECHR. And finally, promote the brilliance of Britain through the centuries in all fields of human endeavour.
I like it. And also at school as well. I mean, let's get into a bit of that positivity at school. Matt, thank you very much indeed. This one comes in reference how to make Britain great again. Maureen says, in fact, this might be more about Reform UK, but we discussed it under the same banner. Maureen says, message for Isabel Oakeshott. As an ex-Reform member, I left after Nigel Farage's ungrateful treatment of Ben Habib. I will still vote Reform, but I will holding my nose. If Nigel Farage starts to water down the scrapping of net zero pledge, Reform will lose my vote forever, says Maureen. Well, that may well be the case. They might go a little in that direction. I don't think they'll somehow become evangelists for the Green agenda. But, yeah, they're hoovering up, trying to hoover up Labour votes. You can expect a more modified approach on many things. Sarah is in Somerset. Sarah, what have you got for us? Hi.
Hi. I was listening to your guest earlier, and I just wanted to say that there's so many labels out there now, and there's so much that there's almost like a status of victimhood. And I myself have had major injuries, you know, pillion passenger on a motorbike, smashed up one of my legs years ago in my 20s. But I still got through that, and I still went on to do other things. And what is lacking is like the spirit of courage, and that maybe somehow there's too much victimhood mentality. You've got to be courageous, and you've got to somehow see through this sort of Trojan horse of devolution that is hitting our youth.
And do you sense it's a very good point. I mean, there's a lot in that, isn't there, to kind of get to. How does a politician legislate to try and address the very point you've just made? What do they do?
Well, our children are being told to hate themselves. They're being told that we haven't created anything in this country that's worth praising. We're being told if you're white and Caucasian, you're basically responsible for the evils of the world. These are huge lies. And everything about this country that people have held in high esteem. We are out of about 194 countries in the world, only about 24 of them are actual liberal democracies. And this is why people want to be here. They're escaping regimes. At least some are, but some are trying to change us from within.
Indeed, and quit this idea that your identity is something, firstly, that anyone cares about, but secondly, that it should be in some respect utilised and put forward as a reason for an injustice, or perhaps even a reason why you should be given a job, for that example. Listen, Sarah, thank you very much indeed for that. 0344 499 1000. How do we make Britain great again? We've got the voice of doom up and running. Do you know whose voice this is?
An election between the haves and the have-nots.
Any ideas? Don't call in on that. 87222 on the messages. We'll be back with more of your calls in a couple of moments. Right now, news headlines at 3 o'clock.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. I promise you, I haven't had a drink, not yet. 3 minutes after 3, right here on Talk, the home of common sense. Heck of a lot to get through in this hour. As you've been hearing, PM Keir Starmer vowing to abolish NHS England, condemning it as the world's largest quango. He's declared war on what he calls the flabby, unfocused and overcautious state. The state we're in, mate. How do we make Britain great again is the question on the back of all of this. More comment from you shortly. Also this afternoon, households are being forced to accept smart meters despite concerns about incorrect readings as energy firms stop offering traditional ones to meet, you've guessed it, net zero targets. Got to meet those, and you need your smart meter to do it, right? And the government has hinted at ending farming subsidies with plans to boost farm incomes to help phase out support schemes. How are they going to do that then? Details on the way. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Should we do the voice of doom? This was the voice we played you just before the news.
An election between the haves and the have-nots.
Who is that? These are some of the wrong guesses. Anna Soubry, no. Margaret Thatcher, it does sound a little bit like Margaret Thatcher back in the day. If you hear some of the old speeches she gave. No. Esther Ranson, no. Liz Truss, it is not. Edwina Currie is a big fat no. Barbara Castle, no. Christine Keeler, it is not. The correct answer, however, was guessed by dozens of you. I thought we really had this one sussed today. Shirley Williams is the right answer. She, of course, was one of the famous five, started the SDP, Social Democrat Party. She was in the House of Lords as well. She was a brilliant speaker. All right, if you like great political speeches, forget whether you agree with her, because that should never be the litmus test on this point. Then look up a little bit of Shirley Williams in action. She was just very, very good. Very good. Lifelong politician, so fair point. Dedicated to the cause. What cause? We can argue forever. Shirley Williams was the right answer, which means there'll be a brand new Voice of Doom tomorrow on the programme. Let's go back to the smart meter question. Households being forced to accept smart meters. This is part of a drive to meet net zero targets despite complaints about inaccurate readings. I never know. I look at mine and I go, is that accurate? But then was the meter I had before, was that accurate? I don't know. It was a little wheel that just whirled around. It was a little bit vague, frankly. The four of the big six energy companies, including British Gas and Octopus, now refuse to install traditional meters when replacing equipment. I don't imagine they have any these days. The original deadline for all households to have a smart meter was 2020, man alive, with Ofgem investigation suppliers over missed installation targets. So let's get a word on this. Jasmine Birtles, financial and business journalist, is with us. Jasmine, good afternoon to you. At one point in life, you were worthless. You were nothing without your smart meter. I think it was for a brief moment. It was a badge of honour for people to have one of these things. But they became controversial rather quickly.
Yes, they did. In fact, originally I was actually part of the rollout of smart meters, and it sounded like a good idea. But that's before I realised what smart really means. I mean, I now replace the word smart with the word prison whenever I see it. Prison meters, prison buildings, prison cities, prison phone, frankly, because smart doesn't actually mean clever. It means surveillance. It means monitoring. That is literally, that's what it is. I'm trying to think what the acronym is. It's an acronym. It's like surveillance, monitoring, and some technology, you know. So I think, you know, we really don't need yet more surveillance. And we're getting it in the West particularly. It's coming in, and we're just sort of allowing it in because, well, we're being told to. You know, as you say, they're now, well, there's British Gas and Octopus apparently insisting on putting in smart meters. Well, we should have a choice of that. Do we want to be monitored or do we not? And you know, we should not be forced to have these surveillance systems put in our homes.
Yeah, and that is the point, isn't it? Even if it's innocuous, you know, for the greater good, shall we say. It's a great way of, you know, working out, you know, how much the country is spending here and how much energy, how you could be more efficient. Who doesn't want to save a few quid? You know, even if it was for that reason, the fact that it is a form of surveillance, much like so many other areas of life these days, it's a genuine concern. It's not a conspiratorial concern. There's a real reason why you might be bothered by that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I have, you know, people on both sides who are getting in touch with me through my website, Money Magpie. I have people who have been telling me that, firstly, their smart meter doesn't work. So they still have to do estimated readings, and they have to get somebody round to do a final reading, you know, so that's a problem. Secondly, sometimes they do work, but they work too well and they give dodgy readings. So that suddenly their bills have gone up. But then I have other people who are on the, you know, who don't see the problem with surveillance. The usual argument is, oh, well, I'm not doing anything wrong, so it doesn't matter. Well, I'm a lifelong church-going Christian, and if I were in China, that would be a problem, actually, because the Chinese government does not like churches. It certainly doesn't like Christian churches. So I would actually lose credit points, social credit points, if they knew that I was a churchgoer. So, you know, the idea that being a good person, you know, including being a good church-going Christian, is an okay thing. Well, in many situations, it isn't. So if we create these rails, these train rails, if you like, for surveillance, even, you know, at the moment we feel we have a half-decent government. I mean, you know, one has all sorts of views about what they're doing, but they're not yet wearing tight uniforms and having a special salute, you know. So even though we are allegedly in a democracy at the moment, there could easily come a time when we're really not. And who knows, even in our current alleged democracy, how much of this surveillance is actually working against us.
Yeah, and
so,
it's a fair... I was just about to say, just to kind of follow on from that comparison about surveillance, a friend of mine bought an electric car and was having trouble kind of fueling it, charging it. And they went back and forth with the garage, and you know, and they realised, in fact, what had happened is that the particular manufacturer of car did not accept charging from some electricity suppliers because of a conflict of data collection. And I can't remember whether it was that the car was collecting the data, and some companies had tried to put a block on that, or whether it was the electricity company that was collecting the data. Either way, the idea that, you know, for example, you can get smart fridges now, so every time I open my fridge, it will register somewhere how long I've opened it for. It will then be able to, through amazing algorithms, be able to say, well, you clearly took a smart oven that will detect whether I've cooked a pie or a chicken. This is a really strange place that we've ended up in, right? I mean, data protection, what happened to that?
Well, that's just a joke. Honestly, it's a complete joke, data protection. There's no protection. And, you know, we could go on. Smart TVs that are literally watching us, watching them. And this is happening. And even, you know, those cute little Roomba vacuum cleaners, you know, those robot vacuum cleaners, they're mapping out your home and they send that map up to the cloud. There's so much. I mean, you know, all of us who have a smartphone, smart again, we are being tracked, we are being listened to. I would never have the Amazon Echo or the Alexa, because that is absolutely a spy in your own home. Again, it's recording you on a regular basis. They've even been used, certainly in America, they've been used in court cases for murders, etc., because they are recording things. So we're just being recorded and watched all over the place. As you say, if you have a smart fridge or a smart oven or whatever, all this data can be used against you later on if you want life insurance, if you want health insurance. Doctors can get hold of it, you know, and decide whether you could live or not. We're creating a real problem for ourselves later on, if not for now.
Yeah, it's a good point. Listen, Jasmine, great to have you on. Thank you. Jasmine Birtles, financial and business journalist. I'm kind of a bit conflicted on this because I don't sense that there is a sort of Book of Genesis style proclamation of, you will all be given the mark of the beast. You'll be a walking barcode. Somebody did say to me years ago, we'll all become algorithms. We'll become walking algorithms. So if you like, the cloud, once shared with all interested parties, will know precisely where you drive, how often you drive. That would have been unthinkable a few years ago without sat-nav and all that goes with it. Your mobile phone is tracking you anyway. Your Alexa can be recording you. Your little Hoover is mapping out the size of your house. Your smart meter is telling everybody how often you turn a light on, whether you do it for 20 minutes, whether you do it for 20 hours. Your fridge knows what you've taken out of it. Your oven knows what you've put into it. Your washing machine knows how much so all of this info is somehow crunched. Here's the question. What do you do with all of that? I mean, you might at the end of the week realise that I've eaten 2 chickens and washed my pants twice. Is that of use to anybody, really? I know the kind of more focused thing is, well, it's all about selling you stuff. Yeah, OK, that's a lot of info. We already have a bit of that. It's all about selling you stuff. If you go to a website, you click on it, they put you on the mailing list, you take your name off the mailing list, or you should do. So they've already got a bit of that, but apparently it'll get down to the point where, if you see an item of clothes, it'll come up just for you, and it will know literally that is the colour you absolutely want. It won't be vague or obscure. It will know. So that's why algorithms try to perfect themselves. Similarly with food, etc. The question, I suppose, the conspiratorial question is, well, what can be done with that information? Oh, you're using your car too much. Well, just put a block on that. You've cooked too much meat this week. That's not good for the environment. Your oven will be stopped from working because of the meat, or your electricity will be curtailed because of the amount of lights you've got on. I don't know. I'm thinking these are the kind of arguments you hear about it. Your thoughts on that? Also, on ADHD, Alan says this, whilst I accept there is a relatively small percentage of real health-related learning and behavioural conditions, ADHD is just the tip of the excuse iceberg. Instead of parents taking responsibility to challenge and manage difficult child behaviours, my observation, having had some experience of this, is that it's easier for them and the education system to create and define further disorders and levels of severity to avoid doing the hard work. They can then petition for additional resources and funding whilst offloading responsibility for properly bringing up and educating a significant proportion of young people. Although I'd have to, my experience of this, just having kids in school, Alan, I know exactly what Alan is saying, is that there's not much gain in having your kid diagnosed with ADHD. You don't think you get anything for that. You certainly don't get the school will keep their eye on it and go, okay, well, if they fidget a little bit too much, we'll give them a fidget toy or something. But you don't get, there's no benefit for that. If you get into other more challenging areas of neurodiversity, that might be the case. But generally speaking, of parents I speak to say it's nothing but a massive challenge to be in this place. Let's take a call. David is down in London on Broken Britain. David, what have you got for us?
Well, first of all, I'm very worried about how many times you wash your underpants a week.
Yeah, well, you don't know how many I wash.
Look,
it's industrial.
Many years ago, I had an excellent geography teacher who said we live in a very lucky country. We built on coal and we're surrounded by fish. Well, you know what happened to all that? So, as Mr. Trump says, drill, baby, drill. As far as I'm concerned, we're importing coal right and left. We're importing gas. Our industries are crippled because of we've got the dearest costs in Europe. Everybody's laughing at us all over the world. Ian, I don't know where to start. I think I might be the voice of doom this afternoon.
Well, I think, yeah, but you're a good voice of doom, though, David. That's the point, isn't it? Because you're right. I mean, I love that, what your teacher said. We're built on coal and surrounded by fish. So nothing could ever go wrong, really. I mean, the worst scenario, we just eat a lot of fish and stay warm, right?
And also, we've got the best and most efficient farmers in the world.
There you go.
Why don't we destroy them as well?
So it's not just the fish. We've got the fish, we've got the livestock, we've got everything going on. We can heat our homes. The bit that I can't, the more I think about it, the more terrified I feel. How could we be in a worse situation? How can agriculture and food prices be more expensive today than they were 20, 30 years ago. How is that even possible?
Well, as I said, I'll go back to Mr. Trump. Drill, baby, drill. We can do fracking. We can got all the coal. We've shut all the coal mines.
Yep.
It's much more efficient now, Ian. You haven't got to worry about the pollution. My son used to live next to a guy who spent 20 years of his life how to catch the sulphur, etc., and then they turned around and said, we don't really want you anymore because we're not going in that direction.
There it is. Like it. David, it's a grim but very informative call. Thank you. David in London. I saw that document. There's been loads of them. You know how they, I keep mentioning broccoli as well. You know they send like a big combine harvester. There's a fleet of combine harvesters go into a field. And I don't know if you've seen this. They pick the broccoli and they wrap it. It gets wrapped on the combine harvester. Literally ready for the supermarket. And it's all wrapped up and they go into a big old bucket on the back. And the combine harvester goes off and then a little voice goes, combine harvester number 2, please. And in it comes and it does the same thing. I think they do with the carrots and the straw. I mean, incredible. It can pick and provide farming, food-based farming at a rate of knots that our forefathers would have looked at. My granddad was a farmer. He would have looked at that and gone, that's an illusion. That's an optical illusion. You had people out in the fields picking this stuff by hand, taking forever. And yet here we are, despite having the science to grow this stuff throughout the seasons, which was never there before, despite having the science to make sure they stay in good nick, the veg stays in good nick, and having the science to pick this stuff, and yet we're short of it and can't afford it. That's just mad, right? That's mad right there. I know I'm only picking, one aspect of food here, but if you think of farming-based food supplies, which would be, meat, dairy, and of course veg, you'd think that stuff would be as cheap. It could be coming out of probably it would be free by now. Here we are in a place where your food. I was talking to my other half about this, about food, and she was saying ridiculous. The price of stuff. Even if you can afford it, doesn't mean to say it's okay. Even if you look at it, why is a packet of pasta for the kids that used to be 20p is now £1 20p? How could that be a thing? A loaf of bread. And you catch yourself sometimes, don't you, in a supermarket, because stuff you have to buy, so you don't always investigate the price. I've got to buy tea bags, I've got to buy, and once in a while you go, hang on, sorry, have I picked that off the wrong shelf? It says £2.80 here. I only bought a Haribo. That can't be right. Sugary one, but still expensive. Something's gone horribly wrong, and that's just food. We talked earlier about energy, about the NHS. It's all gone backward. We've gone backwards. How do we make Britain great again? 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It's kind of funny how ADHD and dyslexia as well does sort of have a divide. Perhaps many of you will be more surprised about the dyslexia element to this. Vivian says ADHD, perfect excuse for bad behaviour and no discipline, and dyslexia, excuse for not being taught to read early enough in life. You see, the problem with that is that it's an interesting but largely ill-informed analysis, and I don't say that to be insulting to Vivian, but when I look at a couple of families I know who have more than a disciplined approach to raising their kids, and two of them are absolutely fine and the third one isn't, and families that have, you know, way ahead of the game in teaching their kids to, you know, I mean, even bringing in tutors to teach their kids stuff before they went to school, you know, that kind of thing. I mean, the idea that though all of those families just kind of couldn't be bothered to teach a kid to read. And in any case, most kids start reading when they start school, right? I mean, some you give it a little go before they do with a few basics, but it would that template of analysis I don't think would fit Viv. But I could be wrong. This comes from Claire. I heard Peter Hitchens this morning talking about dyslexia, and to some extent I tend to believe him. Phonics is seen as old-fashioned in teaching, and word recognition has preference. However, in my opinion, children need to assemble words to understand them, and once a child can do this, then word recognition can be understood. I do believe that many kids are misdiagnosed as having dyslexia when they haven't mastered the art of reading through bad teaching methods and skills. I heard him say that as well, Claire. And I was watching it thinking, but they do learn through phonics. That's exactly how they learn at the moment. That's the bit I didn't get. So I don't... They do learn to, you know, assemble words to understand them through the kind of sounds and all that goes with it. And I got the impression Peter Hitchens was saying that doesn't exist, but that is precisely how they learn. Unless there's another form of phonics I'm not aware of. Claire referenced Britain. Britain is a busted flush. It will never be great again because too much damage has been done. Call me cynical. That's my middle name, says Claire. Or Claire Cynical, as she will now be known. One here from Stuart. I'm no fan of Starmer, but scrapping NHS England is the kind of bold move I expect from Reform or the Tories. Instead, the Conservatives are silent and making no impression on the public. While Reform is infighting, has made it clear they're not yet a credible party, let alone a government in waiting. Labour could well win another landslide if Starmer becomes more like Blair. Well, the reason the Conservatives won't oppose it is because it was their idea to bring it. I take it back. They'll oppose the move because it was their idea. They won't come up with an alternative because they want to retain what was there. They put so much in it. But you're right. I mean, at the moment, Stuart, you would expect this would be territory where the Tories would go absolutely nuts on this. They'd be saying, "What, really? Is this your answer, Keir, to this?" They'd be ready and waiting. I mean, though, you know, we knew what Keir Starmer was, you know, there are press releases, OK? They're embargoed on speeches that are given. So yesterday, for example, we would have known roughly what Keir Starmer is going to say here in the newsroom, here on the programme. We get these things sent through from government. You can't talk about them until the speech has been done, but they give you an idea. Sometimes they literally give you the whole speech that you're going to hear the next day. You just can't mention it or say, I don't know why. There's no great, you know, secrecy in it, but that's the way it's worked for years, sort of gentleman's agreement and stuff. But the Tories would have had access to that. They could have been, Badenoch should have been up there. You know, you don't even need to assemble a press corps now. Just record something in your office, make it look big and bold, and respond. Pav is in Harrow on Broken Britain. Pav, what's going on? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. Well, I'm a little bit despondent here in the pessimism, so allow me a few points just suggest ways that we could get the country back to past glories and potentially better.
Okay.
But we obviously have to start domestically. The overarching aspect of what I'm about to say, 3 points here. The state needs to be reduced. We can't have this waste and this, basically a fatness around the state. Many governments have made the right sort of comments. Unfortunately, very little substance to it. And I'm afraid I remain sceptical whether this abolition of NHS England isn't just a way to reorganise it, rename it, and that basically to say that that's a new thing. But we'll give the Prime Minister the benefit of the doubt. Hopefully, he might come up with something new. But if we start with the NHS, it's all well and good saying that NHS England is going, but ultimately the problem about procurement and indeed funding of the NHS has been there for a long, long period of time. In my opinion, we need to get away from this idea about private or public or whatever you want to call funding. If the NHS is there, it needs to work to produce the best health outcomes for every single patient it can, irrespective of how that's provided. You only need to look at accident emergency, 4 to 16 hours potentially waiting lists, which we get in 2025 is basically prehistoric. And frankly, we should be ashamed of it. The idea that it's the envy of the world, well, if that's the envy of the world, quite frankly, I don't know what the world's going to celebrate and enjoy. Number one. Secondly, moving on, and partly related to that, I didn't want to use the DOGE acronym, but you get my point. Taxes and non-dom status. The problem is we're many organisations have suggested this as a result of the previous administration as well. Taxes now are at the highest they have been for a long, long time. I think the figure I saw was 1949, and they're on course by the end of this Parliament to even exceed that. You add into that the very myopic and rather stupid policy of essentially isolating a lot of the non-doms. I'm not going to necessarily allude to Laffer, Ian, but people know what I'm talking about. And the Times reported, that since the autumn, 10,000 had gone, whatever it was, in terms of every hour or every couple of hours, whatever it was. That was a very myopic policy, clearly aimed at sort of class warfare and dogmatic nonsense as opposed to economic reality. Again, it needs to go. Policy needs to be thought through. You move on to the third aspect, because a lot of this does come down to better use of funding. Getting police back into the community and making sure that policemen, not necessarily just on the beat, are aware and interact with the community so that we know who they are. They're not just random police officers who turn up when you dial 990 or 10111, whatever it is. And inbuilt with that, with the community relationship with the police, where are the community projects here? The sports, the music, the drama, which are things where team bonding and team building exercises, which traditionally and in most countries help people overcome the ideas of race or division or those types of things, because it really ingrains into people team ethics, something which is bigger than the individual or the individual identities, which unfortunately, in the absence of those things, are things that people gravitate towards. Yeah. Lastly on that, and I'll get on to, I promise I'll be as quick as I can, the migrants issue. So we have the migrants issue here, and people, successive governments have banged on about, doing various things, and let's be honest, lots of platitudes, lots of nonsense, not much action. If you look over to the United States, and I'm loath to do this normally, CBS, that well-known Trump peddling organization, no less, have suggested that given a direct comparison with this time last year, illegal migrants, as we call them, 94.1% reduction on the southern border. So it shows you, and I'm not expecting anything dramatic in this country, because let's be honest, nothing moves as quickly in this country ever, but it shows that with some robust action and executive policy and some forethought, things can be different. I'm not saying you're going to eradicate overnight, but it can be done. So that's on the domestic front. Four very easy things which a lot of these wonks should probably have in their ideas and mindset because they're paid to do this. Lastly, you talk about making it great. Well, what are we gravitating towards? Whether we like it or not, the rest of this century is going to be dominated by two things: the decline of the US, relatively speaking, because it's still the most powerful nation, and the growth of the Indo-Pacific region. What on earth? And we've taken some steps to try to make a better, bilateral relations with the US, increase it over $200 billion a year with trade. Great. What are we doing with the Indians? The bulwark to China, democracy, huge links that we have with them from our past. At the moment, in 2019, £23 billion worth of trade, and thankfully, Jonathan Reynolds, when he went over, suggested this should be $41 billion, with an attempt by the end of the decade to take that somewhere over 50. That should be, we should be taking advantage of the fact that we're no longer in the EU and embracing those two nations, given that the role that they do play and will play in the world of geopolitics, and ensuring that the good relations we have with both countries we rely upon. But instead, successive governments, and this is why the reform aspect is going to be key, are just there giving us empty words and, patting themselves on the back. We're not seals. We're not going to clap for you. We want action.
Yeah.
And as one of your people said just before, Ian, if we don't do that, then it's going to be non-recoverable. But I remain of the opinion some robust action and direction of travel should lead us exactly where we should be. And whether other people in other countries like it, that is on the preeminent stage in the world. And hey-ho to our country, as wonderful as it is.
Indeed. Great call, Pav. Thank you. And not only do we want action, we're paying to get action, and we're not getting our money's worth at the moment. Thank you to Pav in Harrow. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk 25 to 4. Let's look at this story. Farming subsidies will eventually end, the government has hinted, as ministers push to make farms self-sufficient. Like farmers haven't tried that. The farming minister, who is Daniel Zichner, said public funds won't support the sector forever, referring to the EU-era basic payment scheme, which is set to end year after next, 2027. It's the first time the government has suggested that subsidies relied on by most farms could be phased out. Let's speak with Liz Webster, founder of Save British Farming. Liz, good afternoon to you.
Hello, Ian.
Nice to have you with us.
We just go from one nightmare to the next.
Well, I was about to say, it's like somebody woke up in the, some department somewhere and went, oh, hang on, we haven't given the farmers a pasting today, so we've done the inheritance tax thing, we've done the land grab thing. I know what we'll do. We'll do subsidies next. Is there a merry-go-round going on here?
Yeah, I think so. Like, they kneecapped us, and then then they gave us a few belts, and now they're sort of coming for the final blows, it feels like. So, yes, it's really not good. And I'm really worried about farmers' mental health as well, because this onslaught of assaults is very, very worrying.
Indeed. Just explain then.
These people's livelihoods, their way of life. They don't know anything any different. And it's like being ransacked. It's like someone arriving at your house.
Yeah.
and basically pinning you up against the wall and robbing you, and then holding a shotgun to your head. Yes, it's.
Well, yes. Somebody saying, you know, that £200 a month council tax you pay. Yeah, we've just changed it to £3,500. You know, or you know. Oh, and by the way, you're going to get no gas supply for the next year. It's those kind of massive disruptive. You know, these are huge seismic disruptions in your industry.
They are.
Can you explain what a subsidy is and does, in what kind of form it takes, and who gets it, if you could, Liz?
Yeah, look, there's lots of different subsidies across all sectors, but after the last war, where we nearly starved, they decided the only way that in this part of the world we can compete globally is by subsidising food, because the weather is against us. We're in the Northern Hemisphere. We're particularly in a hard position in Britain. I mean, I don't have to tell your viewers this. We know what our weather is like. And so farming in this country is harder than farming in other countries across the world, because we have a very difficult climate. And that is why we subsidise, or we have subsidised, food production. It's not to keep us in a luxury lifestyle. It's to ensure there's enough food for the country. In the last war, we actually ran out of food almost, and we in fact, the government gave directions for families to kill their pets because there wasn't enough food, and we're almost doing the same again. We're running down self-sufficiency to such a low percentage that if there is an escalation of war, which is looking likely, quite frankly, we're going to be exposed. And this government are putting all of us who live on this island at risk because of aggressive ideology. And I would ask people to really sit up, write to your MPs. If you have got a Labour MP, please make sure they understand history, because a lot of these younger MPs in particular don't remember, or their families haven't ensured they remember, why we need food production in Britain is really important. And demoralising our food factories, which is what farms are, is really an attack on everyone who eats, including their pets, including our waste. So it's really dangerous what they're doing, and frightening. So I hope that they do reconsider. I plead with them to reconsider. But at the moment, you know, we feel as if they're cloth-eared, not paying attention to us, and just seem to be in a hurry to deliver an aggressive American trade deal, maybe. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But
well, that could be the next thing,
not
couldn't
good.
it? There's another potential spanner to throw in the works, where a trade deal could have huge implications for farmers. What is it about this industry, this one industry that was almost, you know, it's almost kind of quintessentially British farming? I know it's global, but you take my point. It's, you know, it's been there forever. My grandfather was a farmer. You know, I get all of that, and it's so crucial to food security in this country. Why do politicians appear to take at best a very casual view, and at worst a worrying dismissive view?
I think it's a London-centric, out of touch with, and the food system has been so efficient, and we did rely on the French farmers to kick off, actually, which we haven't done here until recently. And so I think they're just totally out of touch with how food arrives in the supermarket, that most of it comes from our farms, and it has for some considerable time. And they also haven't dealt with the reality that with Brexit, we no longer have the food bank that we did have when we were in the EU. I would be more relaxed about destroying British farming if we still had that assurance of the food bank from Europe. But we don't. Europe don't want to come over here anymore because of all of the red tape, which this government also promised to get rid of, but they're not getting rid of. They're actually cutting the funding for the border inspections, which is meaning more illegal imports are flooding in here, putting people at risk of disease and death, food poisoning, and also a biosecurity risk for us farmers as well, and for individuals, because, as we know, these diseases can jump to humans as well. So it's putting us at risk of another pandemic. So there is no sensible joined-up thinking, and I hope that the grown-ups can suddenly appear and take back control, because, you know, it is a very worrying situation. And I know it looks like it's only about farming, but every person in this country is connected to farming because you eat.
Spot on. I mean, the knock-on effects, the ramifications are absolutely huge. You know, if farmers, if the farming industry sneezes, then the amount of areas that catch a cold are absolutely vast. Listen, we'll keep our eye on this, Liz, and thank you for being with us this afternoon. She is Liz Webster, founder of Save British Farming and a farmer. Thank you to her. It's kind of interesting that the farmers are sort of getting this like triple-pronged attack of the inheritance thing. And yesterday, Rayner was talking about, well, if you need to build some houses, we'll have to kind of, get local authorities to compulsory purchase a bit of farmland if it looks inactive or something like that. Well, I mean, it's not your land, and find somewhere else to build it. 0344 499 1000. This in from Alex, who says, back to the ADHD question. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 9 years old. My parents were at the end of their tether with me, but they never stopped trying as soon as I was diagnosed. I went on to tablets, and overnight my behaviour changed. So you can't say that it's down to my mum and dad's poor parenting. Ever since then, I've been on tablets. I've now got two. Is that 2%? Or just two, and I'm successful, or is that two children? I'm not sure. I'm in a successful position at work, none of which will be possible without tablets, says Alex. I mean, I read a book years ago, and I can't remember, was it called An Unquiet Mind? I think it was called An Unquiet Mind by somebody called Kay Redfield Jameson. I think I've got the name correct, who I'm trying to get this right, read it a long time ago. A friend of mine recommended it, not the sort of thing I might normally read, but it was really interesting. It was, she was a psychiatrist who was also bipolar. So slightly different point, but it's relevant. And she was controversial because many people argued that her bipolar could be so problematic that she probably shouldn't be practicing as a psychiatrist. I think that was the kind of central sort of accusation. And in this book, she talks about tablets, that people try to battle it without the medication. I can do this, I've got this, and you stop taking them and everything goes wrong again, because when she was in a manic place, it was devastating. Bad things happened to her and around her, which is why it was controversial that, should this person even be seeing patients? But she made the very simple point, and I think I've got this roughly right towards the end of the book, sometimes the tablets work. Sometimes they just work. She quit challenging or trying to, she needs the tablets. Simple, straightforward stuff. 0344 499 1000. And this one from Leo, we talked about smart meters, who says it is vitally important that people are aware what the ultimate result will be with the compulsory installation of smart meters. It will mean that energy suppliers will be able to ration the amount of gas and electricity entering your homes. They'll also, with the push of a button, be able to completely cut off your energy supply and force customers to comply with the government's brutal net zero targets. Welcome to Big Brother Britain, says Leo. That is true, that ultimately they could switch off, but your credit card can be switched off like that already. The ability to, well, where do you start? The list is endless of what the digital world, the downside of the digital world. Thank you, Leo, for that. We'll have more from you on the way. Drive is coming up with Peter Cardwell. Peter Cardwell on Drive at 4 o'clock this afternoon. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Graham says most companies won't give you the best fixed price deal unless you have a smart meter, says Graham. I would imagine also it's one, if you were starting from scratch building a house, I mean, I guess some companies say we just don't have anything but smart meters anymore. You know, the idea that there's no benefit to a smart meter is also not true. We're looking at the potential downsides of it, but I never know whether it's accurate. I do look at it sometimes and think, well, the bit I can't work out is I come down in the morning, so the heating has largely been off at night, and I'm the first up. I come down in the morning, you've got the electricity on one side and the gas on the other, so it's gas heating, and it's a different number. It can be as different as like 45p, so this is the start of the day, to like £1.20, and I think, well, hang on, that's 3 times what it was yesterday. The heating's been off. I mean, I know different stuff happens with heating systems, but I don't get that. I don't understand that. Maybe somebody else does. We've got some breaking news out of Russia. President Putin apparently has agreed now to a ceasefire and a pause to fighting with Ukraine under certain conditions. He was never going to go, yeah, all right, I've rolled over, boys. He goes on to say that we agree with the proposal of the ceasefire, but our position is based on the assumption that the ceasefire would lead to long-term peace, something that would remove the initial reason for the crisis. Well, I mean, what does that look? Something that would remove the initial reason for the crisis. That's land grab speak, right? We want that bit of land there. And America is going to say to Ukraine, yeah, see that bit of land? See what he said? Give it to him. What? Give it to him. Otherwise you'll get another pasting in the Oval Office. That's how that's going to pan out. Let's continue to talk broken Britain. Jim is in Dorset on this point. What do you got for us, Jim? Afternoon to you.
Oh, good afternoon, Ian. How are you doing?
I'm good as gold at this end. Fire away.
Good, good. That's quite interesting what you said about Putin, but I won't comment on that.
All right.
That's not the reason for the call. The reason for the call is about make Britain great again. Yeah. And the reason we say that is because, you know, if America sneezes, we get a cold, right? Mm-hmm. So everything comes from America comes back to us ultimately, and I think we need to be more optimistic here. You know, we have a brilliant country. We have a great country.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't want to get political, but the leadership we have at the moment doesn't state that. Yeah. Doesn't say how great we are. We can do this. We can do that. Come on, let's go forward. And you know, it upsets me because I think, well, hang on a minute. We're full of brilliant people. Yeah. Why are you just downsizing everything instead of upsizing everything?
But I think partly as well, you know, when Thatcher came into power, there was I know I was a little kid at the time, but I know, and looking back on it and having read way too much for any one individual on Thatcher's era, you know, there was a genuine sense of the country had turned a page. It was a new beginning. We weren't this old, you know, knackered, on its knees nation anymore. There was going to be optimism. There was going to be new industries. People would have a greater stake in their own life. Even in 97, in fairness, when Blair first came in, before we found out he was an utter nut job, before the same kind of feeling, right? 97, there was that great kind of, it was Britpop, it was new, it was, you know, these young bucks had come over to change the way we did business. We haven't had that for nearly 30 years.
You're optimistic.
There's nothing, is there? I mean, there's no sense. You know, our last prime ministers, you know, Boris Johnson was a bit cheerful and a bit of a cheeky character, but didn't really, you know, there was no philosophical backbone to what he was saying.
No, absolutely. But I mean, this is what upsets me, because I think we are a brilliant nation. And I think that we're not told we're a brilliant nation. We're told we're so bad at this, so bad at that, so bad at the other. And I don't think that's right, because I don't believe that's what we are. We're a nation of people who are brilliant at what we do. And when we put our heads to it, let's go back to Churchillian times, yeah?
Yep.
You put your nose to the grindstone and you get the job done. And we can do that.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely spot on. You're spot on. Jim, great call. Thank you. I wonder whether we've lost the kind of, in this kind of weird question. Look, there's a pie chart on this, right? There's no like one reason why stuff's gone a bit AWOL. But certainly on that specific point about sort of confidence of a nation and the sense of nationhood, we have sort of surrendered a collective identity for individual identities. And whilst individuals have always, there's always been a sort of punk element to any group of people, I get that. Simultaneously, it's almost as if we've actively set out to dismantle an identity and say, no, every individual, you can all have your own identity, whether you were born here, not born here, whether you are somebody who wants to, champion a particular way of life, a particular gender, whatever it doesn't matter, and you will be taken seriously based on your identity. In fact, we'll change laws based on your identity. Rather than this, I know things change, we can't all live in, 19 whatever, but, there was, I think, a genuine sense that there was a country and that country had an identity. Let's finally, before we talk to Peter Cardwell, get a voice note. We talked ADHD a little earlier on, referenced Peter Hitchens' comments on Mike Graham's show earlier. This is from Michael.
I was diagnosed at 42. I never believed in ADHD. I thought anybody that had it were just naughty little kids whose parents didn't really care too much. All I can say is after being diagnosed and given the medication, I realised that it does exist. It is something. And the medication has been a godsend to me and my family. It's helped me keep my job. It's helped me keep things happy at home and stopped me being on almost a destructive path.
There it is. I'm glad to hear, Michael, that you got what you needed, and long may that happiness and that journey continue. That is pretty much it from us. But Peter Cardwell is going to be here after 4. Hello.
Hello, Ian. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
Good.
Very much.
I'm glad to hear it.
All good. Yeah. What's happening?
Well, huge NHS reform, as you've been talking about. We'll talk about it too. We'll also talk about the story I think a lot of the media is actually ignoring on Syria. Huge change there. Also in the Congo, 70 Christians were beheaded in the last week or so, and there's just very, very little about this.
On that point of Syria, you're right. I mean, you keep hearing headlines. Somebody, mostly on social media, someone talks about Syria. I think Dan Hodges has talked a lot about it. But
well, where is it? Why are people not talking about it? So we are going to be talking about it. We're going to be saying that, guess what? If you say, yes, Bashar al-Assad, horrible man, deadly, horrendous dictator, get rid of him, great, excellent, but what replaced him? Well, guess what? It wasn't people who were holding the hands and worshipping the rainbow. In fact, they're often getting rid in the most horrific ways of their enemies. So we'll talk about that as well. We'll talk a bit later on as well about the sport and also Trump and Ukraine and what's actually happening there. And it's very interesting as well. There's anger as a school for royals founded by a Nazi refugee has been cancelling a talk by a Jewish writer because it might upset people. He might say things about the Middle East. That's here in the UK. Free speech is under threat because of that.
Again, this is where we scratch our head. We've been asking, how do we make Britain great again by getting rid of nonsense like that?
Exactly.
That one of it. You mentioned sport.
Yes.
In which particular sport? Because I know you're massive.
Various sports.
I know you're massive on football.
Various.
You're big on football.
There's football. There's all sport all the time. No, there's a segment with sport.
PSG Liverpool penalty shootout the other night. What did you make of that?
I was on tenterhooks, Ian. My nails are bitten to the quick.
I bet they were. You're a red through and through on these matters.
Well, that's right. It's also the third day of the Cheltenham Festival, as I'm sure you'll know, and apparently the Scots are facing
horses.
Horses, yes, horses are involved, yes. And the Scots are facing their biggest challenge